Chapter 230. I will. Ji Guang chuckled and watched Li Xiao leave the room. Qin Guan's concerned voice sounded. What's wrong? Are you hurt? Yes, I'm hurt. The other party didn't intend to take my life. Otherwise, I'm afraid I would have died last night. Speaking of this, Ji Guang's mood was very calm, as if he was narrating something that had nothing to do with him. But these words were so deafening in Qin Guan's ears. Who did it? Even you are no match for them? Yes, I'm not that person's opponent. Even if I was on guard, even if I brought a few subordinates, he could still easily kill me. Speaking of this, Ji Guang's mood became a little depressed. After all, in his strongest aspect he had to admit that he was inferior to the other party. This made him feel unreconciled. But whether he was convinced or not, the reality was like this. He was indeed not Tai Hu's opponent. He couldn't even withstand one move. Feeling that Ji Guang's tone seemed to be disheartened, Qin Guan asked tentatively, was it that person who did it? Sigh. A long sigh. After what happened last night, Ji Guang thought it through and accepted it. Yang Qindong was not someone he could afford to offend. Moreover, this person ignored the law and acted extremely decisively and ruthlessly. He hadn't expected to make a move on his own accord, so he hadn't been on guard at all. Of course, if such an opponent was bent on targeting you, what could you do even if you were prepared? Forget it, Eunuch Qin. Some people are destined to be beyond our ability to deal with. If we have to force it, I'm afraid we will lose our lives. After being silent for a long time, Ji Guang said such words that Qin Guan could not believe. Are you afraid? Qin Guan did not believe that the always confident and arrogant Ji Guang would bow his head one day and so completely. Yes, I'm afraid. Ji Guang admitted frankly. If that person wants to kill me, he can do it at any time. Tell me, Eunuch Qin, facing such an opponent, what do you want me to do? Would he continue to oppose that person until he lost his life? This time he's targeting me. I'm afraid he'll harm Eunuch Qin next time. Listen to me and let go. Knowing that Ji Guang still didn't know what had happened to the other eunuchs, Qin Guan let out a long breath and said, actually, he didn't just target you. Just last night there were 13 steward eunuchs who were targeted. If they were injured, if their lives were threatened. What? Ji Guang, who was half lying on the bed, suddenly stood up. He stared at Qin Guan and asked, is what Eunuch Qin said true? I'm not lying to you. Qin Guan shook his head, his eyes filled with disappointment. Especially when he thought about how he had gone to the Yang family village to denounce them yesterday, he felt that it was so ridiculous. The other party had already made preparations and was just waiting for them to rush forward. They were so confused that they actually did as they were told. It was no wonder that they were scared and threatened. Qin Guan admitted it. This gave Ji Guang a big fright. His mind spun slightly as if he had thought of something. He asked, Eunuch Qin, where is he right now? Although he didn't mention his name, Qin Guan still understood what Ji Guang meant. He replied, I just received news that he went to Chicken Crow Mountain yesterday afternoon. Went to Chicken Crow Mountain? Who went with him? Are the servants who usually follow him here? Thinking of a possibility, Ji Guang asked aloud. They're all there. Even the mercenaries guarding the Yang family bank, the Immortal abode, and the sky beyond heaven are all there. They didn't do anything strange. Qin Guan said this somewhat painfully. His face turned even uglier. When Ji Ning heard this, he also sucked in a cold breath. Yang Qindong had gone to Chicken Crow Mountain. This was to create an alibi for him. With a group of subordinates by his side, the others had no choice but to forcibly separate him from the attack on the eunuchs last night. But this was the most frightening thing. If those people were still standing there, it could only mean one thing. After leaving the capital, the Duke of Loyalty still had people he could use, and they were people they didn't know existed. Last night it had been these people who had attacked. The mercenaries were already very frightening. Now an unknown and mysterious force had appeared. How could they not be shocked? When he thought about how there was probably a pair of eyes watching his every move, Ji Guang couldn't help but shiver, and then he shook his head. Forget it, Eunuch Qin. Listen to this official's advice and let him go. We'll tell Eunuch Jin the situation and let him beat and punish him. As for what he wants to do, that's his business. As for us, we'll just obediently stay here. What? But if we do that, Jin Ing will inevitably look down on us. Qin Guan immediately retorted when he heard that Ji Guang was admitting defeat. So what if he looks down on us? It's better than losing his life. Besides, we gave him all of Wang Zhen's treasures, so we've done a great service. Even if we put on a show for others, he won't touch us right now. Ji Guang shook his head. He knew that after making this decision, the chances of him being put in an important position were extremely small. But when he thought about Yang Qindong's various tricks, he suddenly felt that he was invincible. Ji Guang's words echoed in Qin Guan's ears, and after thinking for a long time he finally made his decision. Fine. You rest and recover. I'll go and speak with Eunuch Jin. Qin Guan left, and not long after he went to the palace to see Jin Ying. He gave her a detailed account of what had happened yesterday afternoon and last night. In the end, he stated his own judgment that the Duke of Loyalty still had a mysterious force in the capital that they couldn't see. This force was so powerful that they couldn't deal with it. Jin Ying had just received Wang Zhen's silver and was in a good mood. But when he heard Qin Guan's report, his face paled again and again. He suddenly recalled the result of his agreement with Yang Qindong. They had agreed to mind their own business, but now Yang Qindong had broken the agreement. If there really was such a mysterious force that suddenly wanted to target him, what would he do? Jin Ying had just obtained great authority, so he needed to properly enjoy it. He didn't want to die at this moment. Thus he quickly made his decision. Forget it. Since the Duke of Loyalty has Wang Zhen's receipt, we'll let this matter rest. In addition, without this Duke's permission, you went to make trouble for the Duke of Loyalty. Since you were the ones who provoked this matter, you should resolve it yourselves. In short, we need to keep the peace. I don't want to see anyone injured or even killed because of this. Jin Ying shamelessly pushed all the blame onto Qin Guan and Ji Guang, choosing to stay out of the matter. Qin Guan sighed in relief that he would no longer pursue the matter of the silver, but he was also put in a very difficult position when he had to apologize. Eunuch Jin, is the Duke of Loyalty at Chicken Crow Mountain? Should we wait for him to come back? There's no need to wait. Some things should be resolved as soon as possible. How about this? You and Ji Guang immediately go to Chicken Crow Mountain. You must have a good attitude and be sincere. Do you understand? Jin Ying didn't want any accidents to happen when he left the palace, so he wanted to resolve the matter as soon as possible. Qin Guan left with a disheartened expression. After he left, there was a ban in the palace that spread among the group of eunuchs. In the future, no matter which eunuch they were, they had to address themselves as this duke, instead of this duke. Otherwise, they would have to bear the consequences. Chicken Crow Mountain. It was the end of autumn and early winter was about to arrive. The leaves on the mountain were beginning to turn yellow, giving people a very bleak feeling. However, this didn't stop Hu Yan and Xiao Yin's interest. They arranged for people to bring out the meat skewers and all kinds of food that they had brought. Then they lit a fire, causing the air in the area to become much warmer. In response, Yang Qindong watched from the side without any intention of interfering. He liked to see his women happy. In his opinion, this was one of the goals he pursued. If he wanted the people to be happy, he first had to let his family be happy. Then it would be the happiness of the entire Han people. With the experience from last time, Hu Yan and Xiao Yin were able to command the troops in an orderly manner. Yang Qindong didn't have to do any skewers like last time. He only needed to sit and enjoy the success. When the sky slowly darkened, the bonfire lit up the sky. Hu Yan and Xiao Yin had also prepared everything. Just as they were about to call Lu Lang to enjoy with them, Tiger's Mane walked over. Young Master Qin Guan and Ji Guang are here. So fast. Yang Qindong, who had been prepared for this, was still somewhat curious when he heard that the two had rushed over in just a little more than a day. Yes, there are also 30 embroidered uniform guards. Among them, Ji Guang was carried over. Tiger's Mane continued to explain the situation. Let them wait outside. This young master will go and see them in a while. Yang Qindong casually waved his hand. Since they had done something wrong, they should have the attitude of admitting their mistakes. Leaving them out for a while was just training. After sending away Tiger's Mane, Yang Qindong followed Hu Yan and Xiao Yin to the bonfire. Everyone was waiting for them here. Outside, a few members of Cold Front were closely watching Qin Guan and Ji Guang's group. They had already been waiting here for nearly 2 hours. The weather at this time would become cold at night. The two of them didn't bring any warm clothing, so they felt a little cold. However, they could only endure it. This time they were here to admit their mistakes. They weren't here to collect debts like yesterday. Chapter 231. A head eunuch of the Imperial Horse Directorate and a commander of the Embroidered Uniform Guard. Normally they were lofty figures, but right now they were like children who had done something wrong, waiting for the adults to forgive them. On the other side, Yang Qindong was gargling his mouth after eating and drinking to his heart's content, while listening to Tiger's Man's report on the information he'd received during the day. Oh, so Wolf's Man and the others did well? Yes, they did very well. The process was clean and efficient. According to Yang San, it was beyond his expectations. Tiger's Man replied in a low voice. Very good. Give them a collective third-class merit. Yang Qindong chuckled, then spat out the last mouthful of water in his mouth. Are they still waiting? They're waiting. Without the young master's permission they wouldn't dare leave. Tiger's Man's face lit up with joy. Even though he hadn't been the one to do it, seeing Qin Guan and the others lower their heads still made him happy. A hint of a smile flashed across Yang Qindong's face. Some people were just like that. They didn't want to be nice to others and insisted on being beaten up before they knew what pain was. Forget it. It's already been 2 hours. It's getting dark and they probably didn't bring any blankets. We can't keep them here for the night and then give them their things, can we? Tiger's Man nodded in agreement. That's right. We'll just let them dry for a while. As for blankets and whatnot, we don't have any extra. Haha. Yang Qindong laughed heartily. Then Tiger's Man and Beta Persei led the way to where Qin Guan and Ji Guang were. No one knew what they talked about when they met. However, those who were observant noticed one thing. The embroidered uniform guard that had been standing guard outside the Immortal Abode's street had all disappeared. In their place were the soldiers of the warden's office. It was also from this time onwards that everyone really managed to keep to themselves on the surface. The Immortal Abode was still packed to the brim, and the Beyond Heaven's Gate was also bustling with activity. Batch after batch of rare goods were being sent out from the gate to different locations. People were walking around the Yang family bank, either depositing or withdrawing money. Everything was done in an orderly manner. Time passed by 1449, and it was the Spring Festival of 1450. The Spring Festival of the Great Ming Dynasty was the busiest time of the year, and it was also the time for families to reunite. The entire capital was bustling with activity. Even the commoners were like this, let alone the people in the palace. As the emperor, not only did he have to reward his subjects for their hard work over the past year, he also had to receive many foreign diplomatic missions. This was especially true for the Great Ming Dynasty, which was a grand and powerful country. There were many vassal states and countries that didn't want to be conquered. Every year during the new year, they would send envoys to pay tribute to show their submission or respect. This year was also Zhu Qiu's first time as emperor. In order to show their respect, the diplomatic missions from many countries were much larger than in previous years. For a period of time, it was common to see people in strange attire in the capital. The population of the capital was rapidly increasing, and the number of consumers was increasing by the day. The business of the merchants was getting better and more shops were opening. The shops that Yang Qindong had bought at a low price were rented out. Even though the prices were a little higher, they were still in short supply, allowing him to make a small profit. The capital began to prosper once more. This was the scene of a peaceful era. Places like the Immortal Abode, which were usually bustling with activity, were now even more difficult to find. This was especially true after the drama of the war between the war god and the Walla, which attracted even more praise. Anyone who saw this drama felt their blood boil, and even after leaving the Immortal Abode they were still talking about it. At this time it was time for Dai Zong to summon soldiers, and because of this many people were seeking to join him. The Great Ming's military was primarily supported by military households. The so-called military households were born soldiers. Your father was a soldier. After becoming a military household, as long as you gave birth to a son, he would have to become a soldier when he grew up. This also ensured that the number of soldiers in the army would reach a stable level. However, the Battle of Tumu Fortress and Shi Heng's defeat had severely damaged the army, and its numbers were severely lacking. In these circumstances, Dai Zong Zhu Qiu issued the order for the first conscription after taking the throne. He had originally believed that the treatment of soldiers was poor, and that there wouldn't be many who wanted to join the army, perhaps even a few. He had never imagined that the drama in the Immortal Abode would cause many young people and even a few scholars to join the army. When the news got out, it caused an uproar among the nobles. The Great Ming despised the military and emphasized the scholarly, even suppressing the military. The treatment and status of soldiers in society had always been extremely low. But now there were scholars joining the army. Although it could be said that these scholars didn't have much of a future, for them to join the army was still a loss of face for scholars. Because of this, some proud literati hated Yang Qindong to the point that they even hated him. They believed that it was because of the drama in the Immortal abode that this had happened, and that he was the main culprit. He had brought shame to all the scholars in the world. But just as they were discussing this, the Yang clan manor suddenly opened a Yang clan academy. To outsiders, it was said that the loyal and courageous duke had nothing better to do, and wanted to experience the feeling of teaching and educating people. But in reality, only he knew that this was for the future development of the Xianxia Academy. Even though there were many advanced books in Crimson City, they had all been forcefully instilled by Yang Qindong. Without coming into contact with them, seeing them, or even understanding the principles behind them, it was difficult for them to make any progress. This gave young Master Yang the idea of nurturing talents and sending them to Crimson City. This was something he had no choice but to do. With Yang Qindong's current status and the schemes he had set up, it was impossible for him to leave the capital. Now was not the time for him to leave the capital and the center of power of the Great Ming dynasty. Since he could not return to Crimson City, he naturally could not go back to impart knowledge. His only choice was to find talents in the capital and impart knowledge to them. With the scholars joining the army and the sudden opening of the Yang Clan Academy, the Yang Clan Manor instantly became the focus of all the scholars' condemnation. Some people even dug up Yang Qindong's history, claiming that he had only been an elementary scholar and that even his status as a high scholar had been bestowed upon him by Emperor Ying. Perhaps he had some literary talent, knew how to do business, and even knew a little about the art of war. But when it came to opening an academy, he was far too lacking. One had to know that those who were able to open an academy had to have sufficient knowledge to do so. It was not something that could be done by a random brat. There were many voices of opposition. Similarly, there were many supporters. Because of Yang Qindong, many of his books were published, and he was hailed as the #1 prodigy of the younger generation. In addition, he had composed many new songs, earning him the title of Eastern Commander. He had saved Emperor Ying, defeated Walla, and protected the position of Emperor Dai. This caused his fame to soar, and he had many admirers in the army. How could such a person lack supporters? If this was in the future, Yang Qindong could probably create a Weibo account and have tens of millions of fans in just a few minutes. There were supporters, but there were also opponents. The matter became more and more serious. Eventually, the matter reached the imperial court and reached Zhu Qiyu, the acting sect master. Zhu Qiyu had some headaches about Yang Qindong. Although this person was an official, due to his young age he didn't seem to have the awareness of being an official. He had once been conferred the title of General of Agile Cavalry, which was equivalent to a second-rank official, but he had never attended the royal court. It was even very difficult for him, the emperor, to see him. In his own words, he was still young and too playful. He would talk about politics in the royal court later. Given that Yang Qindong's actions were always unexpected, Zhu Qiyu agreed to his request. After all, he was also worried that this person would cause trouble today and tomorrow, causing headaches. However, he didn't expect that even if he didn't enter the royal court, he would still be able to cause trouble. It was like setting up a Yang family academy. You don't do good business but learn the elegance of a scholar. Isn't this looking for trouble? Zhu Qiyu had a headache. In the royal court there were people loudly criticizing, but there were also many officials who lowered their heads in silence to show their support. He couldn't help but feel a little headache. My beloved subjects, the Duke of Loyalty and Courage has only opened an academy. As far as I know, he didn't recruit many people, only 50. This doesn't seem to be a big deal. Why do you need to bring it up to the imperial court? Your Majesty, that's not right. As soon as Zhu Qiyu's voice fell, an old official stepped out from the crowd. He held a ceremonial tablet in his hand and had a serious and nervous expression on his face. Teaching and educating people is something that can only be done if there are great scholars and virtuous practitioners. Although Duke Zhongdan is quite good in other aspects, he is only a scholar. How can he take on such an important task? The person who spoke was called He Wen Yuan. His courtesy name was Juchuan and his title was Dong Yuan. He was also called Dunnan, and he was from Xujiang town in Guangchang County. He Wenyuan was knowledgeable and well-versed in astronomy and geography. He was very talented in writing and was good at poetry. His works included Dongyuan Ji Yiding Sun for Books Lecture Records of Rights and Explanations, Dunnan Memorial Herdsman's Spare Book, Criminal Magistrate's Spare Book, and so on. At that time he was the left assistant minister of the Ministry of Personnel. His appearance represented the attitude of the literati. It was a rejection of Yang Qindong's so-called Yang Academy. Speaking of which, Yang Qindong came from a famous family. He was the youngest son of Yang Rong, one of the three Yangs. He had also become a scholar at a young age, so he should have been a model scholar. However, he chose to be a merchant in place of an official and led the army into battle. He went from a literati to a semi-martial person and obtained the position of duke. He became a duke before the age of 20. This made many people envious, and many people secretly refused to accept it. They only thought that if they had the chance they would teach Yang Qindong a lesson and teach him a lesson. After all, a person who reached the peak before the age of 20 that many people would never be able to reach in their lifetime would have such a mentality. Chapter 232. He had always been jealous, but he had lacked an opportunity to ignite it. Now that Yang Qindong was going to open an academy, he Wenyuan, as one of the great scholars, had to express his stance. That's right, that's right. With someone stepping forward, many of the civil officials nodded their heads in agreement, clearly showing their support for He Wenyuan. The reason why so many of the officials stood up to oppose Yang Qindong was not only because of jealousy, but also because of the rules of scholars. Did scholars have rules? Of course they did. Every profession had its own rules, and anyone who wanted to break them would have to pay a heavy price. It was normal for scholars to open academies to teach and educate people. Not only could he promote his name, but he could also take the opportunity to recruit more students, expand his influence, and also collect a lot of money. This was a typical way for scholars to make a fortune. However, because of this, not everyone could open an academy. If one did not have a certain amount of social influence or was not recognized by the group of scholars, opening an academy would only cause them to be criticized, because the scholars would not allow such a thing to happen. Otherwise, if anyone could open an academy, where would they be able to make a living? Whether it was out of jealousy or wanting to maintain their own status and influence, in short, if Yang Qindong wanted to get involved in the matter of starting an academy, they would definitely stop him. He Wenyuan stood up, and then several influential civil officials stood up to express their opposition. Zhu Qiu, who was sitting on the dragon throne, narrowed his eyes into a line. He knew how powerful the civil officials were, and he knew that deep down these scholars looked down on him. This was the disadvantage of only respecting Confucianism. This was because once upon a time, the founders of the great Ming dynasty had also been rejected by the scholars. It was only because the great saber and great stick were too powerful that they had no choice but to lower their heads. In fact, in the changing of dynasties, there were very few emperors who were truly recognized by the scholars. On the contrary, in their hearts, the true orthodox was Confucius's Kong family. That was their pilgrimage ground. With the change of dynasties, countless emperors fell from their horses, countless scholars were killed, and countless commoners were displaced from place to place. But no matter how one looked at it, the Kong clan had always stood strong. The Kong family was the epitome of a man's ability to submit and stand tall. The Mongols came to visit the Mongols, and the Manchus came to visit the Manchus. Li Zicheng had just entered Shandong and was still far away from Tsufu when he shouted, "Long live Emperor Yongchang." When Yuan Shikai proclaimed himself emperor, he said, "Ascend the throne as soon as possible to comfort the people." Zhang Sun was overjoyed after his restoration. Let the whole world celebrate. In 1937, before the Japanese army invaded China, Kong Diqing, the sage Duke of Yenxing, had a great interest in poetry. He advocated that China and Japan were of the same language and the same kind. The poem said, "Rivers, rivers, rivers, pearls and streams are the same. How could there be different people in the same province?" This was a little confusing. Were you trying to express goodwill to the locust army? The longevity of the Kong clan was even greater than that of the imperial family. It was even a holy land for scholars in the world. Even the emperor sometimes had to look at his face when doing things. Just like Zhu Qiu in history, in order to make his son Zhu Jianji the crown prince, he actually bribed the officials of the imperial court. In the history books, the scholars of the imperial court received a special reward from the emperor, 50 taels of gold and double the amount of silver. Why would the Jingtai Emperor Zhou Xian want to reward the officials? It turned out that the reward this time was actually a bribe. The Jingtai Emperor wanted to use the reward to shut the mouths of the officials, to keep their mouths shut. This was why the Minister of Personnel Wang Zhi looked at the gold and silver rewarded by the emperor and stamped his feet. He said, "What is this? I am ashamed to death." Even the emperor sometimes had to look at the faces of scholars, not to mention Yang Chendong wanting to establish an academy. With his status and qualifications, it was normal for him to be opposed and reprimanded by everyone. However, Yang Chendong had just made a great contribution and was given the title of Duke of Loyalty and Courage. Moreover, he was stripped of all his other powers. At this moment, how could Zhou Qiu make irresponsible remarks to him? Since the scholars weren't willing to let him establish an academy, he just let the scholars handle it. Thinking of this, his expression relaxed a lot. As for the matter of Zhonghua opening the Yang family academy, we still need to consider it carefully. Of course, if there are any officials who disagree, you can go and reason with them. This is also a way to promote the culture of our great Ming dynasty. Zhou Qiu didn't say that he was against it, but he also didn't say that he was for it. If you have the ability, go find the Duke of Loyalty and Courage yourselves. This was also Zhou Qiu's answer. With the emperor's words, He Wenyuan and the others immediately beamed with joy. They were worried that the emperor would agree. If that was the case, they would be going against the emperor's will if they went to the Yang clan manor. This could be used against them by the embroidered uniform guards and the Eastern faction guards. But now that they had the emperor's decree, they could do things with fewer misgivings. Immortal abode. The streets were bustling with people and carriages, vividly displaying the prosperity of the capital. The Immortal abode, where the world's best delicacies and best services were gathered, the sky beyond heaven, where all the world's rare treasures were gathered, and the Yang clan's bank had mountains of gold and silver. Because of this, the entire street was bustling with activity. If anyone who came to the capital didn't come here to take a look, they would be too embarrassed to say that they had ever been to the capital. This place had already become a symbol of the capital. This was especially true for the entrance to the Immortal abode. Ever since breakfast, it had been packed with people. By the time the performance started, there wasn't a single empty seat to be seen. As the number of members increased by the day, it was becoming increasingly difficult to reserve a seat in advance. If even the members were like this, there was no need to mention the visitors. As the new year approached, more and more foreign ambassadors arrived. When they wanted to taste the delicacies here, they had no choice but to line up with the common folk of the great Ming dynasty. Even though most of those who could come here wore silk robes and had a certain level of status, it was still viewed as an insult to the common folk to line up with them. There had been a number of ministers who had disagreed on this matter. They said that the foreign ambassadors should be given special treatment to express the magnanimity of the great Ming dynasty. But Emperor Daizong had sent these memorials to Yang Chendong. The Immortal abode was his place, so the decision was naturally up to Yang Chendong. Yang Chendong had only memorized the names of the people who had written these memorials, but he hadn't read their contents in detail. Why did foreign ambassadors have to be superior to others? Worshipping foreigners was a sign of weakness deep in one's bones. Since Yang Chendong had come, he would never allow such a thing to happen. Treating everyone equally was already extremely benevolent. If it weren't for the fact that he needed to earn money from the foreign ambassadors right now, he would have already issued an order that only Han citizens were allowed to enter. Yang Chendong's indifference meant that the foreign ambassadors who wanted to enter the Immortal abode had no choice but to line up. Even though they were full of grievances and had expressions of displeasure, when they knew that the rules couldn't be changed, there were still people who came to line up outside the Immortal abode. Today there was a woman in the line with an indifferent expression. She was indeed an astonishingly beautiful woman. She was dressed in the women's clothing of the great Ming dynasty. Her skin was as white as snow, and her eyes were as bright as the moon. In particular, her exquisite facial features made men's hearts itch. Speaking of which, this woman had quite the background. She wasn't actually a citizen of the great Ming dynasty, but rather a Japanese who lived at sea. Her name was Ohara Junko. Among the many people in the queue, Ohara Junko was undoubtedly an angel. Her appearance also made some of the men who were originally shouting in the queue shut their mouths. It seemed that they all wanted to leave a good impression in front of such a beauty. Junko was also protected by a few guards who weren't very tall but had cold eyes. This only served to highlight her noble status. Her identity was truly not simple. Junko's father was Hito, the current emperor of the Inner Garden of Japan. She had come to the capital of the Great Ming Dynasty to broaden her horizons and seek opportunities. Hito was the emperor of the Muromachi period, the 102nd emperor. He had ascended the throne on September 7, 1428. He was the great-grandson of Emperor Hito, the son of Prince Fushimi Masayoshi, and the adopted son of Emperor Gokomatsu. He was also known as the Emperor of the Inner Garden. During the reign of the Emperor of the Inner Garden, not only was there a rebellion between two Ichiki and Kaji, the dissatisfied people of the southern dynasty were also rioting, causing the political situation to become unstable. In addition, General Ashikaga Yoshimasa lived a life of luxury and enjoyed himself. His power was immense and the emperor had to reprimand him. It was precisely because the domestic situation was unstable that the Emperor of the Inner Garden wanted to find a way out from outside. This time, when he heard that the new emperor of the Great Ming Dynasty defeated the elite cavalry of Walla, he sent an envoy with the intention of strengthening the relationship between the two countries and seeking some help. Junko came with the envoy for another purpose. According to the Emperor of the Inner Garden, if his daughter could be married to the Emperor of the Great Ming Dynasty, then he would have a powerful foreign aid, and at that time his words in Japan would be much more powerful. In order to achieve this goal, the appearance of his daughter Junko was still a secret. At least before the matter was settled, it was not suitable to spread it out and attract the attention of other forces in the country. But now Junko appeared in public so calmly because her matter had already come to an end. That was, the acting emperor of the Great Ming Dynasty had a new empress and more than a dozen concubines. It was difficult for her to find a suitable position to intervene now. Moreover, her son was too young and was still in his infancy. In any case, it was impossible for him to marry Junko and form an alliance with Japan. Chapter 233. It was precisely because she couldn't achieve her goal that Junko had decided to openly dress as a woman and walk out from the group of Japanese envoys. She had also heard that the Immortal abode had delicious delicacies that couldn't be found outside, as well as joyous music and dancing. Her curiosity had been piqued and she wanted to see what was going on. Junko had inherited her parents' strengths, and although she was only 15 years old, she was like the brightest star in the crowd. No one could ignore her even if they wanted to. Important news, important news. The Duke of Zhongdan has opened the Yang Clan Academy, and this has incurred the displeasure of some of the officials. Just a moment ago, the left assistant minister of the Ministry of Personnel, He Wenyuan, led a dozen Confucian scholars and officials to the Yang Clan manor to demand an explanation. An earth-shattering shout suddenly came from the crowd, causing many of the men who had been paying attention to Junko to change their minds. Who was Yang Chendong? There was no need for an introduction. There was no one here who didn't know him. Whether it was the Immortal abode, the sky beyond heaven, or the Yang Clan Bank, they were all his handiwork. This was the idol of many young people, and now someone was going to cause trouble for him. This was definitely big news and a rare occurrence. When the crowd heard the news, they all rushed toward the southern part of the city. They wanted to see how the Dong Shui would deal with He Wenyuan and the other Confucian scholars. At this moment, not only did the line outside shrink, many of the diners who had been eating in the Immortal abode also walked out, causing the originally crowded street to become much emptier. With so many people leaving, those who remained were particularly conspicuous. Among them were Junko and several of her guards. Little Lin Kun, did they go to see the Dong Shui? Junko's crisp voice rang out in somewhat awkward Chinese. Among the guards, a young man with a mustache was originally looking around with a serious expression. When he heard Junko's voice, he immediately turned around and nodded. Princess, they really did go to see the Dong Shui. According to the information we received, the Dong Shui is not in the capital, but in the Yang Clan Manor 15 li south of the city. The Yang Clan Manor? Junko also wants to go take a look. With a trace of desire in her eyes, Junko said in a moving voice. This. Xiao Lin hesitated when he heard the princess' request. In the capital, the princess's safety was guaranteed, but once she left this place he truly didn't dare to guarantee anything. Not hearing Kobayashi's exact answer, Junko's face flashed an innocent smile. What's wrong? Could it be that Xiao Lin-kun had no confidence in his own strength? My father has said that little Lin-kun is one of the best of the younger generation in Japan. Even my father's guards are not much stronger than you. Junko's affirmative voice reached Kobayashi's ears. His body suddenly straightened and at this moment he seemed to have become much taller. Well, since the princess is interested, Kobayashi will certainly fulfill her wish. Then let's set off now. Alright, thank you for your hard work, Korean-kun. After her brilliant plan succeeded, Junko's face returned to normal, as if she wasn't the girl who was begging just now. Outside the Yang Manor, He Wenyuan and several other great scholars were standing in the square 50 meters away from the manor. None of them were wearing official robes. Obviously they were going to question Yang Chendong in an unofficial capacity. It wasn't that He Wenyuan and the others didn't know how to oppress others. On the contrary, it was precisely because they knew about Yang Chendong's achievements and knew that he was the Duke of Loyalty and Courage that they gave up showing themselves as officials. In fact, with their status, they really couldn't make Yang Chendong take the initiative to make any concessions. Yang Si and Yang Lu were standing 50 meters away from He Wenyuan and the others. They stared at everything in front of them, looking at the great scholars and the sea of people behind them. It was not an exaggeration to say that it was a sea of people. With a rough estimate, there were more than 1,000 people who came to watch the show. When they were all gathered there, the official road was already crowded with people. Even those who came later to watch the show had to stand by the roadside and the ditches. Since this place became the Yang Manor, it hadn't been so lively. Even when Yang Chendong got married, although there were many guests, there weren't more than 1,000. It was unexpectedly so lively this time. Naturally, Yang Si and Yang Lu, who were responsible for the security of the outer court, were a little nervous. Among the crowd, Junko also came here under the protection of Xiao Lin and the others. It had to be said that in many cases, the use of money was still very great. When Xiao Lin took out some broken silver, he quickly let some people of the great Ming dynasty who came early to watch the show give up the best position. This also allowed Junko to stand in the most advantageous position and watch the battle between the scholars of this foreign country. He Wenyuan and the others came very early, but they weren't in a hurry to say anything. They were waiting for more witnesses to embarrass Yang Chendong. Now that the people had gathered, He Wenyuan and the others looked at each other and reached an agreement. In the end, it was the left assistant minister who stepped forward and said to Yang Si and Yang Lu, who were 50 meters away, "Is the Duke of Zhongdan so arrogant? We have been here for half a day, why haven't we seen him? Could it be that he is afraid?" Afraid? How could our family's duke be afraid of scholars like you? Yang Si's eyes had a hint of ridicule as he stepped forward. Our family's duke is busy every day and has a lot of things to do. He doesn't have time to waste on you. If you don't have anything important to say, please go back. How could He Wenyuan, a great scholar, look good when he was despised by a scholar? But in the end he had been an official for many years and his face had long been trained. His anger only lasted for a moment, and he quickly calmed down and asked back, "You said that we are scholars, but does the Duke of Zhongdan look down on all scholars in the world?" Yang Si's face darkened when he was suddenly countered with a slip of the tongue. He wanted to refute something, but he didn't know where to start. After all, fighting with his fists was his forte, and in terms of talking he was far inferior to the few Confucians. Seeing that Yang Si's face was burning with anger, but he didn't know how to answer, He Wenyuan looked up to the sky and roared, as if he had already won and done something satisfying. "The Duke has arrived." At this moment a thunderous shout sounded. Yang Chendong, dressed in green and holding a folding fan, approached from afar under the protection of Tiger's Mane, Beta Persei and the others. Although it was only a seemingly casual green robe, as Yang Chendong's footsteps continued to approach, a wave of pressure swept over He Wenyuan and the other great scholars. Even the commoners who were closer to them to watch the show felt a sense of oppression. It was as if they were not facing a group of people but a prehistoric divine beast. Yang Chendong was always like this, giving different people different feelings. As a friend, he was as warm as the sun. As an enemy, he was as happy to suppress them like a storm. When did this duke say that he looked down on scholars? Scholars are a part of this society just like farmers, merchants and workers. They can all create value and contribute to the progress of this society. They are all worthy of respect. Before he even arrived, his voice was already heard. It was just one sentence, but it attracted loud cheers from the people who were watching the commotion. Most of the people who came to watch the show were farmers, merchants and workers. Yang Qindong's words had attracted everyone's consensus, and he had instantly changed his role and become the spokesperson of these people. How could it not arouse everyone's good feelings? However, He Wenyuan and the others who heard this sentence also had ugly expressions on their faces. Regardless of whether others could hear it or not, they heard it very clearly. That was, this loyal duke had compared farmers, merchants, workers and scholars. Just from this point alone, it was inevitable that they would feel dissatisfied. During the Great Ming Dynasty, not everyone could go to school, nor did they have the opportunity to. Firstly, the cost of studying was high and it was necessary to hire good teachers to teach, which required money. Secondly, scholars also paid attention to the difference in family background. If one did not have a good family background, even if one went to school and did not have a recommendation, it would be difficult for one to have a bright future. Often one could only write letters for others and work as an accountant. That was also very difficult to be looked down upon. Thirdly, the proportion of scholars who eventually became a Xianxia, an imperial scholar, or an official was relatively small. Many people might have studied for a lifetime, but it would be difficult for them to become a Xianxia until they died. It was a waste of money and time and there might not be a good result. This made most of the people unable to bear it. There were statistics in the history books, and the proportion of scholars in the Great Ming Dynasty was less than 1%. In other words, it was difficult to find one scholar in 100 people, which made their status even more noble. Yang Qindong classified them as ordinary people, so it was no wonder they were angry and did not give him a good face. Loyal Duke? This official knows that you are good with words, and I also know that you have some talent, especially in storytelling, which is beyond the reach of ordinary people. However, establishing an academy is not something that can be done by relying on a few absurd stories. That will only mislead the students, do you understand? He Wenyuan cleverly did not argue with Yang Qindong about the status of scholars. Instead he went straight to the point, saying that Yang Qindong's ability was limited, and that he was not qualified for such a big matter as opening an academy. This official does not know. Yang Qindong waited for He Wenyuan's voice to fall, and straightforwardly shook his head. This official only knows that teaching and educating people is a matter of great virtue. Being able to let the common people of the world know more words and understand more knowledge is the way of the good. In order to achieve this goal, this duke's teaching will not charge a single copper coin for tuition, and 2 meals will be provided. If the student is talented, this duke will recommend a suitable position for him or her, so that he or she can bring honor to his or her ancestors and family. Chapter 234. Wow! As soon as Yang Qindong's voice fell, there was a burst of exclamations from the crowd. Teaching without charging a single coin for tuition and taking care of food was something that no school or teacher could do. Those who were ambitious would not be able to meet this requirement because their own strength did not allow them to. Those who were strong would not have such thoughts. They would rather earn more money. How could they work for nothing and have to pay for food? It was because of this contradiction that Yang Qindong's words made everyone so surprised. But at the same time they were also very excited. Some of the young people from poor families could not help but think that if this was really the case, then could they consider entering the Yang Academy to learn some skills? He Wenyuan also did not expect Yang Qindong to do this. For a moment he was also stunned by these words. He stood there for a long time and did not say anything. It was not until someone next to him whispered something that he suddenly realized something. He looked at Yang Qindong with a mocking expression and said, "Duke of loyalty and courage, this official knows that you are very good at doing business, but teaching people knowledge is not teaching them to do business. That is to see the real thing, do you know?" He Wenyuan's words attracted the laughter of his companions. They all looked at Yang Qindong with disdain. It was as if they were saying that he was a businessman and the students he taught were only businessmen. How could he be considered a real scholar? How could he be recognized by the scholars of the world? The mocking voices of these people did not move Yang Qindong at all. He even laughed. "Haha, who said that this duke only knows how to do business? Have you forgotten who led the army of Walla to defeat them? Besides, it is better to have the guts than to have the guts. If you don't try, how can you know what you can do? Gentlemen, I'm afraid that you can't be literate from the moment you came out of your mother's womb. Is your literary talent extraordinary? The great Confucian scholars' faces darkened when they heard who was the one who defeated Walla's army. They couldn't help but take half a step back. At this moment, they remembered that the person in front of them was someone who could lead an army to defeat the powerful Walla. He killed people on the battlefield without blinking an eye. If they really angered him, they wouldn't be able to reason with him. On the other hand, He Wenyuan was not as scared as the others. He had a bit of courage. Duke of Loyalty and Courage, don't try to change the topic. You know how to do business, you are proficient in the art of war, and you can lead troops into battle. But that doesn't mean that you are proficient in poetry, or that you have truly comprehended the 4 books and 5 classics. During the Great Ming Dynasty, scholars mostly studied the way of etiquette, which was the so-called matters of the sages and virtuous men, and the records of the sages and virtuous men. For example, the Analects of Confucius, the Book of Rites, the 4 books, the 5 classics, and so on. Only those who were proficient in this study and could quote from the past and the present could be regarded as a person with profound knowledge. Only then would they be placed in an important position by the imperial court and enjoy a high position. He Wenyuan mentioned these deliberately to humiliate Yang Chendong. He was just a scholar who was bestowed the title of Juren by the emperor. In addition, he was so young, how could he be proficient in these things? He thought that by saying this he would embarrass Yang Chendong and make him retreat. But unexpectedly, after hearing this, Dong Shuai didn't have a trace of embarrassment on his face. Instead, he laughed loudly. Isn't it just poetry? This duke can just casually open his mouth and it will be done. Ha! This time it was He Wenyuan's turn to laugh. Duke of Loyalty and Courage, there are some things that can't be solved just by talking big. You have to know that it's easy to write a poem. However, if you want to write it well and let people remember it, it's extremely difficult. Don't be careless and lose your status. Of course not. Yang Chendong firmly shook his head. Since this duke is going to write poetry, it will not be an ordinary work. If you don't believe me, Assistant Minister can listen to it and then comment. Seeing that Yang Chendong didn't seem to be joking, He Wenyuan was first stunned. Then he turned to look at the crowd and found that there were many envoys from other countries. He hesitated. It was true that he came to find trouble with Yang Chendong, and it was also true that he came to make him lose face. But if he really made the Duke of Loyalty and Courage lose face in front of the foreign envoys, it would be unsuitable for the country. He Wenyuan's hesitation was seen by Yang Chendong, and it made his impression of this person much better. Knowing the big picture had its advantages. If this person only came to improve his reputation by stepping on him, then after this matter was over he would have to settle the score. Since He Wenyuan was in such a difficult position, Yang Chendong didn't give him a chance to choose. He, who was originally very confident, opened his mouth and said, "I saw it." When Yang Chendong, who had raised the topic, opened his mouth, He Wenyuan and the others immediately shut their mouths and looked at him. When he noticed that everyone's attention was on him, a confident smile flashed across Yang Chendong's face. He continued to say, "A shepherd boy rides a yellow ox, his song shakes the forest. He wants to catch a cicada, but suddenly he shuts his mouth." This was written by a famous poet of the Qing dynasty, Yuan Mei. It talked about a little shepherd boy riding on the back of a yellow ox in the dark forest. No one knew what happy thing he had, but he sang along the way. His singing was crisp and loud, and the entire forest was startled by him. Suddenly the singing stopped. The little shepherd boy straightened his back and closed his mouth. His eyes were fixed on the tall treetops. Cicada, cicada, cicada. In the tree, a cicada was also singing at the top of its lungs. It was the cicada that had attracted the little shepherd boy. He really wanted to catch the cicada. And using this poem, Yang Chendong was also comparing He Wenyuan and the other scholars' arrival to cicada. He himself was a child that could be caught if he wanted to. Comparing a poem to a person, the moment "I saw it" came out, the expressions of He Wenyuan and the others could not help but change greatly. However, this was not the end. It was only the beginning. Yang Chendong's footsteps moved slightly. After taking half a step forward, he opened his mouth and said, "Lotus. An autumn cloud with a speck of red, 10 lotus leaves and 5 flowers. There's no need to close the door to sleep by the lake. The cool breeze fills the house every night. Water dragons chant, white lotus, Who removed the red coat for the green room welcoming the dawn frost? The Huansha people go, the Lingbo people stay, the Crystal Palace. A few pavilions, 10 miles of silver pond, the cold fragrance blows everywhere. In the dusky gull and heron, the bright flowers of the night, deep and indistinct. What's more, the clouds are clear and practiced, the dance is light and graceful, the fan is half lowered. Light makeup, the moonlight, immortal and elegant, the powder faded. When the small boat returns, the duckweed opens, the mirror looks out. Afraid of the remains, the cold waves, the 10,000 leaves, the west wind war. The former was a poem by Chao Yin of the Qing, and the latter was a poem by Wang Chutong of the Qing. In addition to what they had seen before, there were a total of 3 poems. They were almost all connected and were all good quatrains. For a moment, it naturally shocked He Wen Yuan and the others, making it impossible for them to find the problem. They were shocked, but Yang Qindong did not seem to be satisfied. He looked at He Wen Yuan and the others who had come looking for trouble and said, "Poetry is only a small path. As long as you study hard and accumulate, it is not difficult to create good sentences. Don't you think so? Well, since you have come today, it would not be right if I did not give you something. This way I will give you a poem. You must listen carefully. If there is anything you do not understand, you can come back and ask me." Yang Qindong's proud laughter fell into the eyes of He Wen Yuan and the others, making them angry. No matter what, they were people who had been studying for half their lives. Yang Qindong would only be 20 years old during the new year. Even if he could compose a quatrain, it would be impossible for them to ask for advice. This was simply an insult. Everyone looked at Yang Qindong with a few more traces of anger and annoyance. On the other hand, He Wen Yuan seemed to have a pretty good ability to calm himself down. When he looked at Yang Qindong, he said, "I wonder what loyal and gallant Duke has to teach us. We are willing to take a look. If there is something we don't understand, we can naturally ask for guidance. However, if you say it out loud, we will understand immediately." You don't have that high of an IQ. Who would have thought that Yang Qindong directly interrupted He Wen Yuan and said, "Listen carefully, I will only say it once. Whether you remember it or not depends on your luck. If you want to learn, you can come and ask for guidance in the future." Yang Qindong seemed to be very confident as he raised his head to look at the sky above him. After muttering to himself for a moment, he slowly said, "The Shi clan's history of lion eating." As soon as the name came out, He Wen Yuan and the others were stunned. They were indeed smart enough to suddenly think of something. But then he looked at Yang Qindong with an impossible look, completely with a look of disbelief. However, Yang Qindong didn't even look at them. Instead, he looked up to the sky and said, "Stone chamber poet Shi, the gluttonous lion, swears to eat 10 lions. From time to time he was a lion in the eyes of the city. 10 o'clock, Shi city. At that time the clan saw the 10 lions with the power of the 10 stone arrow, and the 10 lions died. She picked up 10 lions' corpses which fit the stone chamber. The stone chamber was wet, so she sent a servant to clean the stone chamber. She began to eat 10 lions' corpses. When eating, the initial knowledge was 10 lion corpses, 10 stone lion corpses. At that time the clan's primordial knowledge was the truth. Testing is the matter." When the poem was finally finished, Yang Qindong let out a light breath. For this poem, for this moment of pretentiousness, he had put in a lot of effort last night. Fortunately, he had memorized it perfectly without a word wrong. This poem talked about a poet surnamed Shi. He lived in a house made of stone. He was especially fond of lions and loved to eat lions. He swore to eat 10 lions. He often went to the market to see if lions had appeared. One day at 10 o'clock, 10 lions just happened to appear in the market. At that time Shi also came to the market. He saw these 10 lions, so he took out his bow and arrow and shot these 10 lions to death. Shi then picked up the 10 lion corpses and prepared to move them to the stone chamber where he lived. Unfortunately, this stone chamber was very wet. Shi told his servant to wipe the stone chamber clean. After the stone chamber was cleaned, he began to try to eat these 10 lion corpses. When he was about to eat, he realized that these 10 lion corpses weren't real lion corpses, but 10 lions made of stone. Chapter 235. This was a strange article written by Mr. Zhao Yuanren, a famous linguist and the father of modern linguistics, in the 1930s in the United States. The original title of the article was, The History of the Stone Chamber Poets Eating Lions. The full text was 94 words, later expanded to 103 words, including the title of the article, a total of 110 words. If it was read aloud in Mandarin, people who did not understand ancient Chinese would not be able to understand it at all. The reason was that modern Mandarin had lost the entering tone and voicing of ancient Chinese. This was a classic that represented the breadth and profoundness of the Chinese language and Chinese characters. At that time it had caused a great reaction. Now that it was taken out by Yang Qindong as expected, He Wenyuan and the others were speechless. They could feel the artistic conception of this poem and it was very extraordinary. However, because Yang Qindong spoke too quickly and used the same words, they could not understand the essence of it from just one reading. It was precisely because they could not fully understand that at this moment He Wenyuan and the others were shocked. They stood there dumbfounded and did not know what to say. Isn't it too fast? You don't understand? It doesn't matter as long as you humbly ask for guidance. I can write down what I just said and take it back for you to study. As if he had already expected such a possibility, Yang Qindong had a very natural and even sincere smile on his face. However, no matter how you looked at it, these smiles seemed a bit too fake, so fake that He Wenyuan and the others felt a sense of shame. In a feudal society where everything was inferior and only scholarly attainments were valued, scholars valued their reputation very much. Not to mention an important imperial court official like He Wenyuan, who was originally a heavenly official of the Ministry of Personnel, who knew how many students he had all over the world. How could such a person be willing to bow his head so casually? If you asked him to bow his head in front of everyone and ask for guidance from a young boy who was not even 20 years old, it would be worse than killing him. He Wenyuan would not bow his head no matter what. At this moment he knew that Yang Qindong was humiliating him, so how could he fulfill the other party's wish? He raised his head with some difficulty, clasped his hands together and turned to leave. What I saw, Lotus, Water Dragon's Roar, White Lotus, and White Lotus had already defeated them. Not to mention that there was also the history of the Shi family eating a lion as the foundation. At this moment, they really didn't know what other meaning there was for them to stay here other than asking for humiliation. He Wenyuan and the others left just like that. When he came with such fanfare and was full of confidence. But when he left he was so straightforward and so dejected. It was really satisfying. Once these troublemakers left, there was nothing left to watch. Many people also left because of this. However, there were also some scholars who stayed. At this moment they looked at Yang Qindong with shining eyes and shouted, "Duke Zhongdan, can you write down the history of lion-eating Shi for us scholars to admire?" One person shouted. Soon many like-minded people followed and shouted, expressing their strong desire for knowledge. Unfortunately, Yang Qindong didn't agree. Instead he shook his head and said, "This duke understands your intentions. If you want the history of lion-eating Shi to be famous in the world, you must have Lord He and the others personally admit their mistakes. Otherwise, no one can force this duke to do anything. You should go back. If you have the time to stay here and talk to this duke, why don't you go and persuade Lord He and the others? If they are really thinking for the sake of all the scholars in the world, what's the big deal if they bow their heads once?" It seemed like he was pointing out a path for everyone, but he just wanted to use them to put pressure on He Wenyuan. Since they dared to come to Yang village to find trouble with him, they should know the serious consequences of angering him. If he didn't punish them properly, others would follow suit. How could he calm down and do anything else? With Yang Qindong's firm attitude, the scholars who stayed behind knew that it would be difficult for them to take a turn for the better. They immediately cupped their fists and left. Then one by one they began to look for their classmates. First, they wanted to tell them what had happened today. Second, they wanted to see if there was any way they could find Lord He and the others and have them admit their mistakes. After all, such a masterpiece shouldn't be buried. It should be spread throughout the world. Soon most of the people had left. In the end, only Junko and her guards remained. Seeing that everyone had left, the guard captain Kobayashi was extremely confused. "Princess, we should go back. If we are late, who knows how long we'll have to wait to eat in the Immortal Abode." Immortal Abode? Kobayashi? Could it be that you've forgotten who founded it? The Yang village must have even better delicacies. Why should we give up what's near for what's far away? Junko was already curious about Yang Qindong. In terms of age, the person in front of her was only 4 or 5 years older than her. There wasn't much of a difference. However, in terms of literary talent and ability, he was far superior to her. Junko had been influenced by her father ever since she was a child. She had always been diligent in her studies. After learning about Japan, she developed a strong interest in the culture of the Great Ming Dynasty. After all, the Great Ming Dynasty was far more fertile than Japan. It was vast and rich in resources and had a much richer history. After coming into contact with the culture of the Great Ming Dynasty and learning about this country, she was quickly drawn in. She knew that this was a country filled with talented people. It was as if there was some kind of magic here. Every once in a while, when the country entered a period of weakness or decline, an extremely powerful figure would appear. That person would step forward to restore order and revitalize the country. They would become even stronger and become a powerful country revered by all. This was the path that Japan had to take. Gradually, Junko was no longer satisfied with her studies. She came to the Great Ming Dynasty just when her father wanted to use the power of the Great Ming Dynasty's marriage to strengthen his ruling power. In Japan, although Junko was still young, she was already famous. Many people even called her the first beauty and the most intelligent woman in Japan for hundreds of years. For a girl to have an angelic face meant that she had endless wealth, not to mention that she was so smart and knowledgeable. If she stayed in Japan, she would have achieved something in the future. However, she didn't do so. Instead, she chose to come to the Great Ming Dynasty. Even if she knew that by doing so she might have to live with a person she didn't like and didn't know. However, she still didn't regret it. This was because she admired the culture of the Great Ming Dynasty. Now, knowing that the marriage with the Great Ming Dynasty's imperial family might be difficult to continue, Junko's goal this time no longer existed. It was impossible for her to say that she wasn't disappointed at all. But now she met Yang Qindong, the youngest upstart in the Great Ming Dynasty. He was the youngest person to become a duke with his own hands. His performance just now was so free and easy. He was so smart and knowledgeable. Wasn't such a person the kind of person she wanted to know and find? At this moment, Junko suddenly had an idea. That was, she wanted to stay. She wanted to get in touch with this loyal duke of the Great Ming Dynasty. She wanted to see if he was really talented or just an ignorant and incompetent playboy. If it was the former, she wanted to see if there was anything worth learning. If it was simply to see if she could accept him for her own use. If he was really capable and could play a big role in helping her father, this trip to the Great Ming Dynasty could be considered to have some gains. Of course, Yang Qindong wouldn't accept her, but Junko never worried about this. In her opinion, she was so beautiful. In Japan, even men who were about the same age as her father, or even a lot older than her father, couldn't help but show a greedy look when they saw her. This was where her charm lay. She firmly believed that Yang Qindong would be like other men and would comply with all her requests. After telling the guard Captain Kobayashi that she wanted to stay here for a while, Junko strode forward and turned around. She chased after Yang Qindong, who was walking towards the courtyard of the Yang family manor. "Loyal Duke, please wait." The voice of an oriole spread out along with the wind. Yang Qindong, who was striding forward, felt a slight vibration in his ear. His footsteps slowly stopped. It was said that one could recognize a woman by smelling her fragrance, but at the same time, some people also said that a woman's voice was also a kind of name card. When a man heard a beautiful voice, he couldn't help but imagine what the owner of the voice would look like. Just like now, Yang Qindong, when he heard this voice, he had an urgent idea to see what kind of woman could make such a beautiful voice. His footsteps stopped and his body slowly turned around. When he looked up, his eyes just happened to meet with Junko's gaze. Junko was more than 1.6 meters tall. Perhaps because she was still young, her figure was slightly petite, but it made her have the gentleness and grace of a woman in the Great Ming Dynasty. She had a lock of beautiful hair that fluttered in the wind. Her eyebrows were slender and long, and her eyes were full of charm. Her nose was straight and her cheeks were slightly flushed. Her lips were tender and alluring, and her dimples were as white as snow. Her skin was as white as jade, and her skin was as white as jade. On her oval face, her eyes were quick-witted, and there was another kind of moving charm in them. At this time, Junko was looking at Yang Qindong with a smile. Her smile was so pure and so clean that Yang Qindong couldn't help but have a feeling that she was an angel in the world. This was the first time Yang Qindong saw Junko, and he had to admit that he was indeed shocked by her beauty. Standing there, he showed a rare look of loss of self-control and stared straight at her for 3 seconds. Chapter 236. Yang Qindong's performance fell into Junko's eyes, and she was very proud of herself. Appearance was her greatest weapon, and now it seemed that it was really effective. Presumably, no matter what kind of request she put forward next, this loyal duke of the great Ming dynasty would definitely not refuse. Junko's pride lasted for 3 seconds. When she wanted to see Yang Qindong's performance, to her disappointment he actually returned to his previous indifferent smile. She felt that the absent-minded loyal duke just now was so unreal, as if she had imagined it. "Who are you? Where are you from?" While Junko was still in a daze, Yang Qindong had already asked her about her origin. The reason why he asked this question was also because of Yang Qindong's confidence. With the power of the Security Bureau, if there was really such a young and beautiful woman in the capital, it was impossible for them not to even mention it. Although he had never ordered Yang Qindong to collect beautiful women, if there was such a woman, Yang Qindong believed that his subordinates would definitely report it. But there was no such report, so there could only be one answer: this woman did not belong to the capital. Junko had always regarded men as nothing, and except for her father she rarely pretended to talk to men. But for some reason when Yang Qindong asked her this question, she couldn't help but reveal her identity. She replied softly, "My name is O'Hara Junko and I am the Princess of Japan." But just after she said this, the captain of the guards, Kobayashi, whispered in disbelief, "Princess, be careful with your words." No wonder Kobayashi was so nervous. It was because Junko's identity had never been disclosed to the outside world. Even the Ministry of Rights of the Great Ming Dynasty did not know about her existence. But now she took the initiative to reveal it. No wonder he was so anxious. "I'm sorry, Kobayashi, I forgot myself." Junko, who heard the reminder, immediately blushed. She knew that she had made a mistake, and it was not a small mistake. She immediately whispered to Kobayashi in Japanese. The conversation between Kobayashi and Junko was in Japanese, and there was not much difference between it and the Japanese of the later generations. But in the relatively isolated Great Ming Dynasty, there were very few people who could really understand this language, and Yang Qindong was one of them. In his previous life he went to Japan to perform many tasks, so naturally he was very familiar with the language there. At this moment he naturally heard the conversation between the master and servant. Although he understood it, the clever Yang Qindong still pretended that he didn't understand it, and even showed that he didn't understand anything. He didn't even clearly hear the first sentence of the identity introduction in Chinese. "What did you say? Junko? What a strange name. Where are you from? Who are your parents?" When Yang Qindong asked like this, it could be noticed that Junko's face instantly relaxed a lot. Junko only heard her name and didn't understand the identity introduction. At the same time she quickly thought of another identity and said, "I'm a businessman from Japan, an ally of the Great Ming Dynasty. I've long heard that the capital of the Great Ming Dynasty is so prosperous and I always yearn for it. This time I came out to see the world." Soon she fabricated an identity, and it was half true and half false, which was no problem for most people in the Great Ming Dynasty. But in the end she underestimated Yang Qindong too much. Not to mention whether the Security Bureau could find out her true identity. For a loyal man who knew Japanese, what secrets could she have in front of him? It's just that Yang Qindong didn't mean to point it out. Since the other party had intentionally concealed their identity, they must have other motives. Although he was curious, he still decided to get in touch with them and see if there were any opportunities for him to gain. Of course, whether this was related to Junko's beautiful appearance, only the 6th young Master Yang himself knew. It turned out to be a foreign friend. "Hee, it's this official's eyes that are blind. As you said, the capital of the Great Ming Dynasty is indeed very prosperous. Since you're here you should take a good look. But forgive this eunuch for being busy, so I won't accompany you," Yang Qindong said with a smile. After saying this he turned around and left. Yang Qindong's performance, in addition to being polite, also had a trace of unfamiliarity, which made Junko very unhappy. All along, men in her eyes were just lives that only had desires. As long as she wanted, she could summon them at any time and send them away at any time. How could there be someone like Yang Qindong, who didn't seem to be moved by her appearance and took the initiative to keep people 1,000 miles away? Maybe it was because he was not convinced, or maybe it was because he wanted to prove something. Junko unexpectedly said, "Great Ming Dynasty's loyal duke, you just said the history of lion eating too quickly. This little girl didn't understand it very well. I don't know if you can ask for advice? This little girl actually admires the loyal duke very much. While speaking, Junko also showed a shy look as much as possible. This was what she learned from the concubines in her father's imperial palace. Although she looked down on that kind of woman from the bottom of her heart, she had to admit that in order to survive, sometimes their special performance was indeed worth learning. Oh, you a girl are also interested in the history of lion-eating, sure? Yang Qindong, who had half of his body turned around, suddenly raised the corner of his mouth at this moment. He deliberately showed an attitude of isolating the other party in order to change from passivity to initiative. Women, sometimes beautiful women, were so strange. The more you took the initiative, the more unwilling the other party would be to pay attention to you. On the contrary, if you ignored the other party would look at you differently. Just now, Yang Qindong deliberately showed a different attitude, and sure enough, Junko was hooked. Since the other party had such a request, Yang Qindong, who wanted to know the other party's purpose, naturally wouldn't be polite. Yes, Great Ming Dynasty's loyal duke. This little girl is indeed very interested in the history of lion-eating, sure. Seeing Yang Qindong turn around, Junko immediately showed a confident look. You can call me Dong Shui like others. Since Junko is interested, why don't we talk about it in the manner? Yang Qindong politely maintained a smile and then made a gentlemanly gesture. Seeing Yang Qindong's invitation, Junko was very happy and even lowered her head shyly. She knew that such an approach would be very lethal. Thank you, Dong Shui. Junko agreed and strode toward Yang Qindong. Xiao Lin and the other bodyguards followed closely behind him, but when they arrived at the gates of the Yang Manor, Mang, who had always been by the sixth young master's side, suddenly stretched out his large hand and blocked Xiao Lin and the others. He then said in a heavy voice, "The manor is an important place and is considered private property. Outsiders are not allowed to enter without permission. It would be best if you all stood guard outside." Xiao Lin was a little dissatisfied that the princess wasted her limited time in such a seemingly ordinary manner. Now that he heard that he and others were not allowed to enter, how could he be willing to comply? He immediately widened his eyes, looked at Tiger's Mane and said loudly, "Baka. What do you want to do?" Although Tiger's Mane did not understand Japanese and did not understand the meaning of this sentence, he could see that Xiao Lin was angry. He immediately glared back at him with an unyielding look. As soon as Tiger's Mane got angry, the tall Beta Persei directly took a step forward, almost sticking to Xiao Lin. Then with his unique height, he stared at Xiao Lin condescendingly as if he was ready to attack at any time. Not only Beta Persei, but even Yang Wu as well as Leng Feng of Chiovi's first guard, also looked ready to attack at any time. The originally harmonious atmosphere became a lot more tense because of Xiao Lin's words. A murderous aura filled the place, and even Junko, who did not know Kung Fu, felt a chill. Junko didn't understand why she felt this way, but she was smart enough to know that she didn't have any advantage right now. She immediately scolded Kobayashi in Japanese. "Kobayashi-kun, this is not Japan, nor is it the palace. Please control your temper and personality. Princess, they don't let us in. What if someone wants to harm you? Won't it be very dangerous?" Xiao Lin replied not to be outdone. In Japan, seniority was still very important. Xiao Lin was just a guard captain. Logically speaking, he should not talk to his master like this. But when it came to the other person's life, he did not have to worry so much. It was because Junko knew this that she did not blame Xiao Lin. On the contrary, she also thought that it was indeed too risky to enter Yang village alone. After a slight hesitation, she nodded. "Well, you are right. Let's leave." After Junko finished talking to Kobayashi, she looked at Yang Qindong and said with a beautiful smile, "Dong Shui, I'm very sorry. My servant reminded me that I have something important to do. I think I have to leave first." She even knew the name of the servant. Yang Qindong was very interested in Junko. He was even more curious about her purpose in coming to the Great Ming Dynasty. That is really bad news. But since Miss Junko has something important to do, I won't delay you any longer, please. Thank you, Dong Shui, for your understanding. If there is a chance, I will definitely come to visit Dong Shui. Junko said very politely. There will definitely be a chance. Yang Qindong said with incomparable certainty. Of course, in Junko's eyes, it was hard to say whether this person was too arrogant or not. Finally, Junko left with Xiaolin and 7 or 8 guards. She left Xianxia village. Yang Qindong's gaze followed them as they left. Even when they were out of sight, Yang Qindong still maintained the same posture as before. Chapter 237. Cough. Young master, Miss Junko has left. Seeing Yang Qindong still standing there in a daze. Although Tiger's Mane didn't want to, he still reminded him. Well, I know. Hearing this, Yang Qindong came back to his senses, but his face was as usual without the slightest embarrassment. In fact, there was nothing to be embarrassed about because he wasn't thinking about Junko nor her beauty, but the purpose of her visit. Because in the history he knew, there didn't seem to be such a woman, but she still came, which could only mean one thing, that history has changed and his advantage of foresight has gradually been lost. In fact, in history, although there was a person called Junko, she didn't come to the Ming dynasty. At that time, although the Ming dynasty defeated the Walla, it was a narrow victory, and such a record certainly didn't attract the admiration and respect of others, so Junko didn't come to the Ming dynasty. All of this changed because of the appearance of Yang Qindong. Tiger's Mane informed the Security Bureau to investigate the Japanese diplomatic mission, if necessary, spend a lot of money to buy 1 or 2 people. It was precisely because he knew that the advantage of foresight was gone, that Yang Qindong needed to deal with everything carefully. Young master, don't worry, Tiger's Mane said confidently. In their eyes, a small country like Japan was just a pirate, not worthy of being treated seriously. This was all because he didn't know that the invasion of Japan would happen hundreds of years later, and he didn't know what kind of ambitions the country on this island would have in the future. But Yang Qindong knew instinctively he never underestimated this country and its people, so he paid special attention to anything related to them. With the order of the 6th young master, the Security Bureau quickly and effectively operated. Soon they bribed a cook from the Japanese diplomatic mission with a large sum of money. From the cook, they not only learned about Junko's situation, but also made a rough outline of the political situation in Japan. The information was sent to Yang Qindong's study early the next morning, and after the 6th young master spent a lot of effort to deal with Hu Yen and the other girls, he saw the latest information on the table. Junko's appearance naturally couldn't be hidden from Hu Yen and Xiao Yin, the 2 girls who stayed in the manor. In fact, Yang Qindong didn't need to hide it from them. It was precisely because of this that Hu Yen and Xiao Yin felt a sense of crisis when they heard that a beautiful girl who was only 15 or 16 years old had appeared outside the Yang family manor and met with the 6th young master. After some discussion, they immediately notified Madame Shui and Madame Xiang, who were still in the capital, who were editing the program. That night they had a fierce battle with Yang Qindong, but the 6th young master, who was in peak condition, was not afraid of them, and just spent a little more time and effort to deal with them. In the morning, Yang Qindong saw the information on the table, and it gave him a general understanding of the current situation in Japan, and at the same time he quickly came up with a way to deal with it. Once, the non-mainstream crosstalk actor Guodigang said, "Give me 3,000 urban management and I can flatten Tokyo." Yang Qindong also had such a dream, but it could only be a dream. Under the premise of world peace, such a dream was destined to be impossible and impossible to achieve. But now it was different. Although it was still the same world, it was hundreds of years earlier, and the world had not even experienced the First World War. Some of the powerful countries in history were still in the early stages of development, and some, such as the United States, had not even appeared yet. With such a good opportunity, Yang Qindong would of course make the first move, and the so-called powerful countries could go to hell. There could only be one order in this world, and that was the Han people were the masters, the Han people were the center, and the Han people's will was the world's will, and the Han people's thoughts were the world's thoughts. Since that was the case, there was no need for Japan to exist, and it was inevitable to understand them in advance. Yang Qindong also thought about this problem when he had nothing to do. Japan was different from some Western countries, and they actually had some relations with the Han people. Some people even said that Japan was a branch of the Han people and there was a basis for it. Although it was not accepted by the world, one thing was true, and that was, other than the language, the Japanese looked the most similar to the Han people. Should such a country be completely destroyed or assimilated for his own use? If it was the latter, what should he do? Junko's appearance was an opportunity to let Yang Qindong see the opportunity to break the fortress from the inside. Come on, inform Yang San, let him spread the news and do it like this. Calling Tiger's Mane in front of him, Yang Chendong whispered. In a medium-sized inn in the capital, Junko had just woken up, but looking at her state, it was obvious that she did not sleep well last night. After coming out of the Yang village, Junko did not idle, but did a lot of work and understanding. But the more she did so, the more Yang Chendong's name lingered in her mind. Previously, she only knew that the army that defeated the Walla was led by a loyal duke of the Great Ming dynasty. In the future, it was just a matter of relying on the strength of the army and the number of people to win. But after yesterday's trip to Yang village, Junko had a certain understanding of him. She realized how young and talented this Duke of Loyalty was, and how he managed to achieve what he had today. Yang Bao, Immortal Abode, Heaven Beyond Heaven, Yang Family Bank, and Yang Family Bank, one after another, especially the most mysterious mercenary group. When all this information was gathered in front of Junko, she could not even look down on this person. Princess, what's wrong? Did you not sleep well last night? Captain Kobayashi walked into the room at this time, and when he saw Junko's slightly haggard appearance, he immediately asked with a face full of surprise. Kobayashi was secretly happy to accept the task of protecting Junko. He was also a man and a young man at that, so he naturally liked Junko's appearance very much. But he was very clear about the difference between his identity and the princess's. It was impossible to be together, but being able to have close contact with her, how could it not be a kind of satisfaction? Therefore, in his heart, Kobayashi cared a lot about Junko. Seeing that the princess seemed to be in a bad mood, he naturally turned pale with fright. It's nothing, Kobayashi. I just miss my imperial father a little. By the way, I'll have to trouble you to collect information about this loyal duke. The more the better, and the more detailed the better. Please. Junko forced a charming smile and said to Kobayashi. Hi, please rest assured, princess. I will do it immediately. Kobayashi saw that the princess was so happy with him and was naturally very happy. He immediately agreed and turned around to carry out the task. But what Kobayashi did not know was that not long after he left, the Japanese diplomatic mission arrived in the vicinity of the inn and began to investigate. This time, the Japanese diplomatic mission sent a lot of people, and many of them were representatives of merchants. They wanted to investigate the Great Ming dynasty's market and see if there was any possibility of further trade relations. While deepening the understanding between the two countries, it would also enrich the Japanese economy. After all, a small country like Japan almost had to buy many things from outside. This gave Junko an opportunity. After spending a lot of money to get a place, she disguised herself as a man and hid in the diplomatic mission. Logically speaking, she was not discovered all the way. Now that she had successfully arrived at the Great Ming dynasty's capital, the possibility of being discovered was even smaller. But all of this was ruined by the appearance of Yang Chendong. Not long ago, the head of the Japanese diplomatic mission, Aoki Yuki, received an important message from his cook. It was that the daughter of the Emperor Ohara Junko had arrived in the Great Ming dynasty and was walking around with ominous intentions. When he received this news, Aoki Yuki's face was naturally full of disbelief. He was the confidant of General Ashikaga Yoshimasa, which was why he was able to get such a good job. But if he let the general know that the princess was also in the diplomatic mission and was in contact with the higher-ups of the Great Ming dynasty, his life would be in danger. Therefore, regardless of whether the news was true or false, Aoki Yuki had to investigate the matter clearly. If he believed that Princess Junko was really in the Great Ming dynasty, then there was no need to say anything. He had to kill her. First, to eliminate future troubles, and second, to create a gap between the Great Ming dynasty and the Emperor of the Great Ming dynasty. If there was a murder case, it would be even more difficult to unite them. The emperor would have to rely on the power of General Ashikaga Yoshimasa. Only in this way could the general's position be unshakable. Aoki Yuki made a decision and immediately called his guard Iwai Shang to report the news. At the same time, he also ordered an investigation. If the situation was true, he could deal with it on the spot. After receiving the order, Iwai Shang brought people to the inn. After investigating, they really found out that Junko was in the inn. While Iwai Shang was shocked, he reported the news to the higher-ups and informed the head of the diplomatic mission, Aoki Yuki. After some discussion, they decided to take action while it was dark. They had to kill Junko and the others in the capital of the Great Ming dynasty. Through the cook who was bribed with money and the observation of the Security Bureau's spies, Yang Chendong easily determined the decision and mission of the Japanese diplomatic mission. He immediately laughed. Very good, the young master naturally won't let go of the opportunity. A hero saving a beauty? This young master likes it very much. Immediately after Yang Chendong sighed, he also made a careful arrangement. In the evening, Xiao Lin, who had been running around all day, rushed back with a few guards. According to the instructions of Princess Junko, they collected a lot of information about Yang Chendong. Chapter 238. Speaking of which, this truly wasn't that difficult of a task because any random person from the streets of the capital would be able to tell one some stories about the Dong Shui. Bringing a lot of information back to the inn, Kobayashi handed it over to Junko. When he saw the happy expression on her face, he felt that his efforts today weren't in vain. Only now did he have time to eat something to fill his stomach. Just as Kobayashi was about to start eating, a trusted guard came in from outside the door. Captain, the situation outside doesn't seem right. I keep feeling that there is a pair of eyes watching us in the dark. What? Throwing away the food in his hand, Kobayashi turned around and looked at the guard who came to report the news with a shocked face. He believed in the ability of his subordinates, and there were some things that he wouldn't say casually. Even if he said it, he should be able to find something. At this moment he didn't want to eat anymore. Instead he turned around and walked out of the kitchen, went to a corner of the small courtyard, and began to close his eyes and sense. Kobayashi was originally a guard of the royal family. Because of his outstanding performance, he was arranged to protect the safety of Princess Junko. His strength wasn't weak and he even came from a ninja family. It was precisely because of this that he quickly sensed something different and a vague sense of danger. Ninjas sometimes have a very strong sixth sense and Ikigami and the others aren't that strong, so Kobayashi quickly felt the danger. When he learned that he was being watched, Kobayashi didn't panic. This was originally within his expectations. With so many people and the princess was so beautiful, it was difficult not to be discovered, but he didn't expect it to be so fast. It was precisely because he was prepared that Kobayashi calmly came to the young master's room. At this time, Junko was looking down at some information about Yang Chendong. When she saw the guard captain suddenly appear, she was a little surprised. Kobayashi? Don't you need to rest? Why are you here? We don't need you now, go rest. Princess, we've been discovered. There are many unfamiliar faces outside the inn. It's very likely that they were sent by Ambassador Aoki. I think we need to move. Xiao Lin said in a slightly anxious voice, his eyes filled with determination. Junko was like a goddess in Kobayashi's eyes. As long as he was still alive, he would never let anyone hurt the princess. He swore. What? Junko said in Japanese in surprise, and then a hint of nervousness appeared on her face. Originally, according to Junko's plan, the danger was only on the voyage from Japan to the Great Ming Dynasty. As long as she safely arrived at the Great Ming Dynasty, she could reveal her identity and then propose marriage to the Great Ming Dynasty's emperor. At that time, whether she chose a prince or even the Great Ming Dynasty's emperor, she would not have to worry about her safety. However, because she had no understanding of the situation in the Great Ming Dynasty, she didn't know until she came to the capital. Although the Great Ming Dynasty's emperor had a prince, he was still in his infancy and it was impossible to arrange a marriage. As for the Great Ming Dynasty's emperor Zhu Qiu, although he was very young, he didn't have any deep foundation. In addition, there were many concubines in the palace. Even if he wanted to arrange a marriage, it would be difficult for him to provide any help to Japan in a short time. Not to mention that the Great Ming Dynasty was now ruled by 2 emperors. She hadn't even solved her own problems. It was even more difficult to get support. The marriage didn't seem to be feasible, so Junko didn't immediately reveal her identity, which also made her safer. Now that the opponent finally came to her door, how could she not panic? Kobayashi, where are we going? After the panic, Junko pretended to be calm and said. After all, she was only a little girl less than 16 years old. Although she was born noble and very beautiful, when it came to facing a real sword, she was afraid that she didn't have any more experience than others. Kobayashi doesn't know. He shook his head very honestly. Princess, you can choose to reveal your identity and marry the Great Ming Dynasty's emperor as a concubine, Or we can kill our way out of the capital, find a place with a coastline and find a boat to return home. Although Kobayashi was confident in his own strength, he only had 8 guards with him this time, and the disadvantage in numbers was his shortcoming. He knew very well that Aoki Yuki, as an ambassador, was leading a team of nearly 500 people. Among them there were more than 300 soldiers who could fight. He didn't have much confidence in ensuring Naoki's safety in a battle of 8 against 300 people. Let me think about it. Junko didn't expect the choice to come so quickly, and she couldn't make a decision for the time being. After all, this was related to her marriage. The man a woman chose was often related to her life's happiness, so she had to think about it. Princess, there's not much time left. Please make a decision as soon as possible. I'll go out and take a look. Kobayashi didn't want Junko to make the first choice. No man would be able to accept the idea of giving away their goddess. But he couldn't guarantee that the princess could leave safely, so he was in a dilemma. He might as well not participate and let the princess make a wise decision. Some decisions weren't so easy to make. While Junko was still in a dilemma, Kobayashi once again entered the room without permission. This time his face became much more serious. Princess, it's already dark and they're about to make a move. There are enemies at the front door, back door and side door of the inn. I'm afraid we'll have to kill our way out. Kill our way out? Will we die? Junko's nature as a young girl finally revealed itself. After all, she was still young and few people wouldn't be afraid in the face of death. Junko's expectant expression made Kobayashi's heart bleed. He didn't want to disappoint the princess, but he didn't have absolute confidence. He could only avoid the question and say, Princess, as long as I'm still alive, I won't let anyone hurt you. The hidden meaning was that as long as Kobayashi was still alive, he would desperately protect Junko's safety. But what if he died? After Junko understood the meaning of these words, she nodded with a blank expression. Well, then we'll rush out. If possible, we'll go to the seaside and find a way to return home. Junko finally made a decision, and that was to not marry the great Ming dynasty. Every woman had her own dreams, not to mention a girl like Junko who had been high and mighty since childhood. She might have more pursuits for marriage, but her man was destined to be different from the rest. He was destined to be the strongest in the world. After Junko decided not to marry the great Ming dynasty, Kobayashi's face lit up with joy. For him, even if they couldn't live together, being able to die together was a very happy thing. After unifying the goal, Junko first changed into a set of black clothes that she had prepared beforehand. The loose clothes not only allowed her to hide better in the dark, but also allowed her to conceal her perfect identity. After everything was done, under the protection of Kobayashi, the group of 6 rushed out of the inn's front door. As expected of a guard who had once stayed in the imperial family, Kobayashi didn't choose to blindly attack. Instead, he sent 2 of his team members to rush out of the back door, and another 2 to rush out of the side door, creating an illusion that they were about to break out of the encirclement. Then he led the remaining 4 guards to protect the princess from the front door. The reason why they chose the front door was because it was on the street. From here they could see the soldiers of the military office patrolling the area. Although these people might not necessarily help them, they could at least deter the enemy. Under the leadership of Kobayashi, the 6 people rushed out of the inn's front door. What greeted them was a rain of short arrows. He saw Kobayashi holding a ninja sword and constantly waving it in front of him. One after another, the arrows hit the blade, making crackling sounds before falling to the ground. Hurry up and rush out. Seeing that the enemy had even used bows and arrows, Kobayashi knew that the situation was more serious than he had imagined. These people had no scruples at all. They just wanted to kill the princess. A wave of arrows was blocked by Kobayashi and his team. The price they paid was that one of the guards was injured by an arrow and lost the ability to move quickly. However, at this time, Kobayashi didn't have time to check the injuries of his brothers. What he had to do now was to take advantage of the enemy's second wave of attacks to leave this place as soon as possible. The farther the better. Follow me, rush out of here. Before he could finish his words, 4 figures suddenly appeared in front of him. They appeared like ghosts, and then 4 ninja swords slashed toward him. 4 ninjas. Facing such opponents, Kobayashi was shocked. At the same time, he stomped his feet on the ground and jumped into the air. He shouted in Japanese, protect the princess. Kobayashi couldn't help but be surprised. He originally thought that Ambassador Aoki Yuki only sent samurai. Although they were difficult to deal with, they still had a chance of survival. But now, seeing ninjas who were famous for being good at assassination, he knew that this time he was afraid that things were not looking good for him. Although the strength of the 4 ninjas was not as good as his, after all, there were too many opponents. If it was just to protect himself or even escape, Kobayashi still had some confidence. But his duty was to protect the princess, which was very difficult to accomplish. Kobayashi, who was in the air, quickly flashed through his mind, but at the same time his empty left hand was not idle. When he reached into his pocket and took out a few ninja darts in his hand. Swish! With a wave of his left hand, the darts were thrown out with great force. They flew straight toward the 4 ninjas who were chasing after him. Kobayashi, whose strength was far higher than ordinary people, successfully pierced the throat of a ninja. One of the 4 opponents was killed. However, Kobayashi was not happy at all, because he had noticed that the 3 men who were protecting the princess had been surrounded by a group of black-clothed samurai. The princess, who was surrounded in the middle, was pale. She was like a small boat in the sea which could capsize at any time. Chapter 239. The situation was so dangerous that Kobayashi, who could have continued to fight in a guerrilla style, gave up his advantage. Instead, he rushed into the crowd on the street and then rushed to the left and right, killing 3 Japanese samurai in a row. Kobayashi's speed was very fast, and his sword moves were also very strange. Coupled with his unpredictable movements, it would take a lot of effort for anyone to kill him. Unfortunately, his mission was to protect Princess Junko. For this purpose, he had no choice but to give up his advantage. He turned around and rushed into the crowd, waving his sword and slashing. The sudden addition of Kobayashi did indeed relieve the pressure of the 3 guards protecting Junko, but as more and more men in black rushed over from the back door and the side door, Kobayashi knew that the 4 men he sent to the east and attack in the west were probably dead, and it should be his turn next. The 3 guards, plus Kobayashi and Junko, were surrounded by 40 to 50 black-clothed men. Longbows and short swords rained down on them, and in less than 30 breaths of time, 2 more of the 3 guards fell. Finally, only Kobayashi, the princess, and the last guard were left. "Captain, I'll fight with them. Please protect the princess and rush out." The last guard saw no hope. After shouting at Kobayashi, he rushed out. However, when he was still halfway out, his chest had been hit by 3 arrows. Then, with his eyes wide open, his body leaned back and fell heavily to the ground. Ah! Seeing the death of her bodyguard at such a close distance, Junko, who had always been calm, finally screamed out in horror. In the dark night, her cry was like the cry of an oriole. It was so different and so amazing. "Who is it?" Perhaps it was because of the shout, or perhaps it was not time for her to die. A thunderous voice sounded, and suddenly, a group of people appeared on the other side of the street, slowly approaching. Captain Akaze, who was leading the team, saw that the target was close at hand and the mission was about to be completed. Suddenly, another group of people came from behind. His eyes showed that he was unwilling to give up. "Come on, rush up, kill the target and then retreat." Akaze thought that there was still some distance between the 2 sides. As long as he was given time, killing the princess and Kobayashi was just a matter of raising his sword. Qi Shang's idea was not wrong. At a distance of a few dozen meters, he did have the opportunity to make a move. Unfortunately, he didn't know who was approaching in the dark. If it was daytime and he could see the luxurious carriage clearly, he wouldn't think so. For no other reason than the fact that the owner of this luxurious carriage was known to everyone in the capital, the Duke of Loyalty, Yang Chendong. It was Yang Chendong who was passing by. As for whether it was intentional or not many people knew. The important thing was that Yang Chendong had indeed appeared here and allowed his servant, Beta Persei, to yell at him first. But after he shouted, the other party had no intention of stopping. This infuriated Beta Persei. "Young master, these people won't listen to our advice. Should we attack? Please give the order." Yang Chendong's emotionless voice came from the luxurious carriage. Standing on the street were all Japanese samurai and ninjas. He wouldn't feel the slightest bit of heartache no matter how many of them died, nor would he show any mercy. Standing on both sides of the carriage, a row of Ling Feng had been waiting for this order for a long time. When they heard the word sixth young master, the 30 people of Lung Feng started a shooting competition by themselves. The reason why it was called a competition was because the 3 classes were competing with each other to see who could achieve more. Bang bang bang. In the dark night, the sound of gunshots was so deafening and earth-shattering. Along with the sound of gunshots, a dazzling red light flashed like a meteor, and the Japanese samurai standing dozens of meters away fell to the ground one by one. Princess, get down. Seeing the red light coming, Kobayashi instinctively hugged Junko and threw himself to the ground. But he didn't know how superfluous this action was. The Lung Feng had already received the order not to hurt the princess. With night vision goggles, how could they hurt Junko in the dark? Bursts of gunshots sounded like firecrackers being ignited. After 2 waves of continuous attacks, there were no more samurai standing on the street. In a short time, except for a few people like Ikigami who reacted very quickly and escaped at the first time, the other Japanese samurai present on the scene were all killed. Clean up the battlefield. Seeing that the scene became silent after a burst of gunshots, Tiger's Mane replaced Yang Chendong and shouted the order. For a time, 30 Lung Feng and Chiovi's first guard began to move forward in a searching manner. In the process of moving forward, there were gunshots from time to time. Whenever they found someone who was not dead, the Lung Feng automatically fired a shot. This also depended on the usual training and teaching. In Yang Chendong's words, most of the time mercy to the enemy was cruelty to oneself. The sound of gunshots came from time to time, making the samurai who were injured but not dead show a determined look on their faces. Knowing that they couldn't escape death if they continued to hide like this, they stood up one by one wanting to make a last stand. But such an action was not even a threat in the eyes of the Lung Feng. They were already prepared, so they only needed to keep pulling the trigger, and the samurai who stood out voluntarily became a ghost under the gun. At this time, Junko was also lying on the ground. Although she was protected by Kobayashi, she was still trembling. She didn't know who was coming, and she didn't know what fate was waiting for her. She didn't even dare to think about it. Compared with Junko, who was scared, Kobayashi's heart was also flustered. He was very clear about the strength of these samurai and even some ninjas. But these people were so vulnerable in front of the people who came, he couldn't help but think if it was him facing advanced firearms, how likely would he be to survive? While he was still comparing in his heart, the footsteps were getting closer and closer, and when they were about to reach him, Kobayashi finally couldn't help but shout in somewhat awkward Chinese, "Don't kill us, we surrender." It was very difficult to make a samurai, a ninja of the Japanese imperial family, shout out surrender, and this was equivalent to Kobayashi cutting off his own path as a samurai. But for the sake of the princess under him, he made this decision resolutely. Kobayashi's sudden shout attracted the attention of the 5 Lung Feng with guns. In fact, they have been paying attention to the movements here for a long time. Even if Kobayashi didn't shout, they would soon find this place. Shouting was just a way to reveal their position in advance. As if to prove that he didn't want to kill, after Kobayashi shouted, he took the initiative to throw the ninja sword in his hand to the ground, then stood up with his hands on his head. "Don't kill us, we are also victims." "Yes, we are victims." As Kobayashi stood up, Junko was also liberated and naturally stood up and imitated Kobayashi, holding his head with both hands with a pitiful expression. "Bring them to the young master." Seeing that the princess appeared safe and sound, Tiger's man, who was in charge of commanding the battle, was relieved, and then took the initiative to step forward, leading Junko and Kobayashi to the side of the luxurious carriage. Kobayashi was naturally specially treated, and he was stopped a dozen meters away from the carriage. But this time, in the face of dozens of black muzzles, he became very obedient. Junko, who followed Tiger's man, smoothly came to the side of the carriage, and saw the scene of the carriage curtain being lifted, revealing the young and confident face of Yang Chendong. "It turned out to be Miss Junko, we are really fated." Yang Chendong slightly raised the corner of his mouth, revealing a faint smile while looking at Junko. Junko didn't expect that the person turned out to be Yang Chendong, but since it was an acquaintance, of course, it couldn't be better. She immediately exclaimed, "Dong Shuai, someone wants to kill me, please save me." "Who did such a beautiful Junko offend? Why did you make such a big fuss?" Yang Chendong didn't say whether he wanted to save them or not. Instead, he looked like he wanted to know the reason. Junko didn't want to expose her identity too early. After all, she didn't know Yang Chendong, and if she exposed her identity, what would she do if he used it to threaten her father? But now that she needed his help, how could she explain the situation in front of her? Junko was still struggling whether to tell her true identity in order to answer Dong Shuai's question. At the other end of the street, there was a burst of dense and complicated footsteps. Hearing the footsteps, Junko's face was once again filled with fear. Yang Chendong, on the other hand, seemed to have expected all of this and didn't show the slightest surprise. Instead, he showed a warm smile to Junko. "Well, you get on the carriage first. And that guy called Little Lin take off his black clothes and change into our clothes." Junko's small hand was grasped by Yang Chendong's big hand and pulled into the carriage. Perhaps because the force was too great, she lost control for a moment and directly rushed forward, until she hit Yang Chendong's broad arms. Only then did she stop. Suddenly being held in Yang Chendong's arms, her nose could smell the strong smell of male hormones. For a moment, Junko was so frightened by the sudden change in front of her that she didn't dare to move. Don't look at how confident she was in front of men, but it was the first time for her to be so close to the opposite sex. Even her father didn't hold her like this. Now, feeling the strong heartbeat in Yang Chendong's chest, she was intoxicated for a moment. Chapter 240. Yang Chendong didn't feel anything wrong. For Junko to throw herself into his arms, he just thought that he had used too much strength just now. This was caused by his underestimation of Junko's body weight. Junko still had a confused expression on her face as she hid in Yang Chendong's arms. A group of people had arrived in front of the carriage a dozen meters away. When these people saw the corpses on the ground and the smell of blood, they instinctively raised their short swords and spears in their hands. The atmosphere instantly became cold and solemn. "Who are you?" the general leading the group asked in a nervous tone. In his hand he was holding a fireball that could be fired into the air at any time. As long as the fireball was in the air, this area would quickly be surrounded by the Ming army. At that time even a mouse would find it difficult to escape. "Who are you? Why don't you greet the Duke of Loyalty? Whose subordinates are you?" Seeing more and more people in the night, Tiger's Mane was not afraid at all. On the contrary, he was full of energy and shouted loudly. This shout also caused Junko, who was in the luxurious carriage, to tremble. She couldn't help but put more strength into her hands. Her hands that were holding Yang Chendong's waist tightened even more. "Don't be nervous, nothing will happen." Feeling Junko's nervousness and fear, Yang Chendong stretched out his right hand and patted her back gently. That magnetic voice was like the sound of nature pouring into Junko's ears, making her feel so warm and so reassuring. From childhood to adulthood, because of her identity, Junko didn't have much contact with the opposite sex. There were even fewer men who could give her a sense of security. It seemed that her father, the emperor, was one of them. Most of the time he didn't accompany her. Instead, he was always worried about the state affairs, so it became an extravagant hope for her to ask for her father's embrace. Now, lying in Yang Chendong's arms, feeling the strong and clear heartbeat, coupled with the sound that could make people feel at ease at this moment, Junko actually had a kind of intoxicated feeling. It was just like the old saying, "It's not the wine that gets you drunk, but you get yourself drunk." On the street, Tiger's Mane's voice could be heard clearly. The soldiers of the warden's office, who had been somewhat nervous and ready to fight at any moment, quickly dispersed when they heard that the person opposite them was the Duke of Loyalty. The leading general knelt on the ground and said in an excited voice, "I am a subordinate of the 5 cities military division Sun Piang. Greetings, Duke of Loyalty." "Greetings, Duke of Loyalty and Courage." Hundreds of soldiers from the warden's office of the 5 cities followed their general and knelt on the ground, shouting loudly. After defeating Walla twice in a row, the Duke of Loyalty had been given the title of War God in the warden's office of the 5 cities. Everyone respected Yojia. Now that they knew that the one who came was the War God, who would dare to have the thought of using swords and spears? Although there were many people, just the title of the Duke of Loyalty and Courage was enough to make them all kneel on the ground. This scene was seen by Junko, who had already lifted the curtain of the sedan. This scene immediately stimulated the depths of her heart and made her more interested in Yang Chendong. "So it's Sun Piang's subordinates. You're all on the same side. Get up." Yang Chendong, who was sitting in the carriage, said in a clear voice. Then he said, Tiger's Mane, stay here and deal with the matter here. Find out who attacked me and be sure to give an explanation. The rest of you will follow me back to Yang Village. Don't worry. Tiger's Mane bowed with his fists clasped. When he raised his head, he gave Yang Chendong a look of understanding. Obviously, he had understood the meaning of the young master. That was, he wanted to use this opportunity to make trouble and teach these people who killed Junko a lesson. Farewell, Duke of Loyalty and Courage. Hundreds of soldiers of the warden's office of the 5 cities had just gotten up. When they saw that Yang Chendong was about to leave, they immediately knelt on the ground again and said in unison. Under the gaze of the great Ming Dynasty's soldiers, Yang Chendong's luxurious carriage drove out of the capital under the protection of the First Guard and Lung Feng. It went straight to the Yang village 15 miles south of the city. When the carriage left the capital, the originally dark carriage suddenly lit up. The lantern in the carriage was lit. Junko also left Yang Chendong's arms with a red face. At this time she finally had a chance to look around. When she saw that the carriage was so spacious that there was no problem for her to lie down here, she couldn't help but widen her eyes in surprise. As a princess, she had seen more than the average person since she was a child. It was not that she had never seen a spacious carriage, but it was the first time that she had seen such a spacious carriage, especially one that moved so steadily without any bumps. Of course, she didn't know that the bottom of the carriage was installed with a shock absorption system. The wheels were not ordinary wooden wheels but were replaced with tires. It could be said that for the sake of comfort, many things in the large warehouse were used. This was why it could be so spacious and stable. Of course, there was only one such carriage in the entire Great Ming Dynasty. Even the emperor didn't have one. He looked around curiously. After a while he finally got a general idea of the place. Then he noticed that Yang Chendong was staring at him. He immediately lowered his head and said embarrassedly, Sorry, I'm really ignorant. I've made a fool of myself in front of Dong Shuai. What? Anyone who enters the carriage for the first time will be like this. It's not strange. Yang Chendong shook his head and said indifferently. What? Did a lot of people enter the carriage? I don't know who they are. Junko asked curiously, but she was afraid that only she knew what she was thinking. There are several people. My 4 wives have stayed here before and my 7th sister. Yang Chendong seemed to think for a moment and then answered unhurriedly. When she heard Yang Chendong say that he already had 4 wives, Junko's eyes showed a trace of struggle. She seemed to be entangled with something, but her good psychological quality made her quickly return to normal. Is that so? Dong Shuai already has 4 wives. It's really enviable. Ah, that's not bad. Many people say the same thing. Yang Chendong laughed as if having 4 wives was something to be proud of. After laughing, he asked curiously, Miss Junko, I saved you today. Can you tell me why those people wanted to kill you? Didn't I say it before? I was born in a merchant family and these people came for money. Fortunately, Dong Shuai passed by here and saved this little girl's life. Junko didn't even blink when she lied. She just opened her mouth. All of this was something she had thought out after entering the carriage. Before she had a complete understanding of Yang Chendong, she would not easily reveal her identity. So that's how it is. In that case, those killers were killed by my servants and guards. You should be safe now, so it's better to say goodbye. Yang Chendong saw that Junko didn't speak the truth, so he didn't point it out but said very casually. It was as if saving her was really a casual thing for him. Yang Chendong's sudden words suddenly made Junko's face change. Just a moment ago she was thinking about how to get out of this carriage and leave Yang Chendong. She didn't believe that a person who could marry 4 wives could ignore her beauty. But before she could say anything, he took the initiative to ask her to leave. She achieved her goal so easily, which made Junko somewhat uncomfortable and gave birth to another idea. This was the wilderness. If she got off the carriage, where would she go? If the killers were following her, they wouldn't be so lucky to meet Yang Chendong. Since it was dangerous to leave here, why not follow Yang Chendong back to the Yang family manor? Although there might be other dangers, it was better than losing one's life. Thinking that Yang Chendong was a loyal duke of the Great Ming Dynasty, he shouldn't do things that were difficult for her. Junko instantly made a decision. When she looked at the 6th young master, there was a trace of obvious gentleness in her eyes. Dong Shuai, this little girl is alone. You can't really leave me here. It's so dark outside I will be scared. How can you be alone? Don't you have a guard? You can rest assured that I will leave him to protect you. Yang Qindong pretended to be puzzled and said. Hearing that Yang Qindong misunderstood her meaning, Junko was ashamed and angry at his ignorance, but she still continued to explain. Dong Shui, Junko didn't mean that. I mean, it's dark outside, I will be scared. It's better to let me rest in the Yang family manor for a night. It won't be too late to continue tomorrow. You want to go back to the Yang family manor with me? It's just that my 2 wives are in the manor. I'm afraid it's not easy to explain. Yang Qindong saw that the little white rabbit had entered the wolf's den, and while he was very proud, he pretended to be very embarrassed and said. Hearing that he was comparing her with his wives, Junko was angry. Who do you think I am to you? Moreover, it was disgraceful to be a concubine as a princess. But thinking that she needed his help, she had to pull a long face and said in a provocative tone. What's wrong? The elegant and talented Dong Shui is actually so afraid of his wife? Not afraid. Yang Qindong shook his head. It's respect. Forget it, it's really dark outside. It's really inappropriate to leave a little girl like you here. Then come back to the manor with me. But remember, you have to leave after breakfast tomorrow morning. Do you understand? Seeing that Yang Qindong agreed, Junko didn't have any psychological burden to stay in the Yang family manor for a night. She quickly nodded. Okay, I'll stay for a night. Chapter 241. Junko's appearance at the moment was very cute, her big eyes sparkling. After Yang Qindong saw it, he secretly praised her in his heart and nodded. Okay, it's a deal. The carriage had no intention of stopping. Without any other orders from Yang Qindong, the large group of people smoothly entered the Yang village. As soon as they entered the village, Yang Qindong took the initiative to get off the carriage. Under the escort of Beta Persei Yongwu and Chiovi, they went straight to the inner courtyard. Junko and Kobayashi were arranged to stay in the guest room in the outer courtyard. When Junko arrived at this new place, she was a little curious. However, because she had just been frightened and the sky was already dark, she felt tired. After entering the guest room, she simply washed her face and went to sleep. Soon she fell asleep. Kobayashi was a lot more alert. Although he fell on the bed, his 6 senses were not closed. But no one had any ideas about him, so his caution was unnecessary. In the study of the inner courtyard of the Yang village, Tiger's man had rushed back. He and the people of the 5 cities warden's office had dealt with the bodies of the killers. After finding out that the killers were actually Japanese warriors, they had already reported it. The next step was handed over to the Genie guards and the East faction guards to take over. They just needed to wait for the news. Good, you did a good job. It's already late. Except for the ones on duty, everyone else should go to rest. By the way, don't forget tomorrow morning's morning exercise. Not only can you not stop, but you also have to make a noise, understand? Yang Qindong patted Tiger's man's shoulder, and after thanking everyone for their hard work, he made some arrangements for tomorrow morning. After taking care of business, Yang Qindong returned to his bedroom. First Madame Hu Yen and second Madame Qiao Yin were already waiting for him. As soon as he entered the room, the 2 of them eagerly stepped forward to help him take off his clothes with great enthusiasm. Yang Qindong stood there and enjoyed the service of the beauties. After his coat was taken off, Hu Yan's careful voice sounded in his ear. Roku, I heard that the Japanese girl named Junko was brought back to the village by you, right? That's right. She was being hunted down tonight. My husband happened to pass by and saved her. Yang Qindong chuckled as he replied. How could he not know what Hu Yen and Qiao Yin were thinking? However, now was not the time to explain too much. He wasn't 100% sure how things would develop, and he wouldn't say anything if he wasn't sure. Hu Yen and Qiao Yin were clearly not satisfied with his nonchalant answer. However, as a married woman, she couldn't say much. On the day they married Yang Qindong, they were already prepared to share it with others. After all, their husband was too outstanding. Such a person was destined to be extraordinary. Rather than having the time to be jealous here, she might as well take this opportunity to give birth to a child for him. This way she would have no worries for the rest of her life and would not have to worry about anything. Lulang, let us sisters serve you while you rest. After making up their minds, Hu Yen and Xiao Yin looked at each other and made a decision. Both of them began to lean toward Yang Chendong. Ah, good, then let's rest together. Yang Chendong was happy to see this. While laughing, he held the two women in his arms and then rolled to the side of the big bed. Compared to Yang Chendong's happy life, Aoki Yuki's was much more miserable. First, when he learned that Princess Junko had appeared in the Great Ming Dynasty, he was nervous and sent his guard, Ikari, to take action with ninjas and samurai. Originally, he thought that he would succeed. But who would have thought that not long ago Ikari came back and said that he had failed? And this was not the most annoying thing. Then the people of the embroidered uniform guard came and asked Aoki Yuki to follow them to the yamen on the grounds of assisting in the investigation. Although he had not been in the Great Ming Dynasty for long, he still had some understanding of the yamen of the embroidered uniform guard, which was the imperial court. Of course, Aoki Yuki refused. He even used the reason that he was an envoy of Japan to protest and oppose. If it was in the future, an envoy of a country would never be easily touched. Even if there was conclusive evidence, it would still need to be approved layer by layer. In the end, it was unknown when it would be done. But now the Great Ming Dynasty was still prosperous and Japan was relatively weak. Of course, Aoki Yuki's protest would have no effect. Under the suppression of several burly embroidered uniform guard, he was quickly taken out, leaving the guard, Ikari, who was constantly stomping his feet. It was late at night and he did not have any better ideas. He could only think about bringing a large sum of money to the officials of the Ministry of Rights at dawn to see how to save his superior. But he did not know that the reason why the embroidered uniform guard acted so quickly was because the matter involved Yang Chendong. The name of the Duke of Loyalty was not only among the common people, but also among the people, the 5 cities' warden's office, and even the embroidered uniform guard. Just a while ago, because they offended this person, many eunuchs and eunuchs were threatened with their lives. Now that this matter was related to him, no one dared to take it lightly. At least they had to take the suspect into custody first. They could not give the Duke of Loyalty a chance to flip out. As for the Ministry of Rights, needless to say, Hu Yan's grandfather was the minister of the Ministry of Rights. If the people there dared to do anything, it would be a strange thing. Of course, Ikari did not know all of this. He was waiting for the arrival of dawn in nervousness and apprehension. After the night, it was dawn. This was a truth that had never changed. When the sun of the new day shone into the room, Junko woke up. But just as she woke up, she saw 2 maidservants serving her in her line of sight. "Miss, get up. Wash up first." In an unfamiliar environment, Junko, who had no opinion of her own, said obediently. Then she had the opportunity to enjoy the new toothpaste and toothbrush for the first time. Then it was the appearance of the soap. The fresh fragrance made Junko yearn for it. After washing her face and rinsing her mouth, the divine mirror appeared. The clear mirror reflected the most perfect side of Junko. Then came the new shampoo, the unforgettable perfume spray, and so on. Even the toilet paper was so soft. Junko was completely dumbfounded by all this. Originally, she thought that the life in the palace was luxurious enough. But compared with here, there was still a huge gap. The clothes were very fitting. Among them, there was a shameful bra and other things. Wearing it was comfortable and showed off her figure. It could be said that it was an eye-opener for Junko. She felt that her whole person was completely changed. Along with the arrival of breakfast, the delicious food made Junko eat until she was full. She felt that the amount of food she had eaten in a day was not as much as the amount of food she had eaten today. She changed her clothes and ate until she was full. With a satisfied mood, Junko walked out of the room and came to the courtyard. Then she saw a scene that she would never forget for the rest of her life. 30 men wearing camouflage uniforms were waving shiny bayonets to practice assassination in the slightly cold morning weather. Their uniform movements made the 30 people's performance seem as if they were one person. Their performance was so uniform that it was as if they were one. But what was even more shocking was that the moment these people rushed out with their bayonets, they didn't make the slightest sound. Because of this, it gave people a terrible feeling. Whether it was practicing formations or weapons, they had to shout. Only in this way could they show their momentum. But these 30 people were doing the opposite. They didn't make the slightest sound during their training. That dull feeling made people couldn't help but give birth to a sense of oppression. It was this feeling that made Junko's chest feel tight and even suffocated. In the distance, the loyal Duke Yang Chendong, who was wearing a vest, was running quickly with more than a dozen people. This scene also made Junko, who was wrapped in a coat, surprised. One must know that the new year was coming and the weather was cold. Ordinary people couldn't wait to hide their hands and feet in a robe. But how could he wear so little? Not only Yang Chendong but even the men around him were wearing the same clothes. They all exposed their arms and legs and ran behind Yang Chendong. Among the crowd, Junko also saw her guard captain Xiao Lin. Xiao Lin was also in the team and he was also wearing thin clothes. Although he didn't expose his arms and legs like Yang Chendong, he was only wearing underwear. More importantly, he was running at the back of the team. Looking at him, he seemed to be panting to the point of exhaustion. Junko had some understanding of Xiao Lin's physical fitness. He was one of the best among the royal guards, but now he was at the very back of the team. He was 7 or 8 body positions behind Yang Chendong. This was something that no one dared to imagine. But now, everything was really happening. Junko covered her mouth with her hands in horror. At this moment she was really shocked. At the same time, Xiao Lin was also shocked. As a guard of the Japanese imperial family and one of the best, Xiao Lin was somewhat conceited. It was difficult for ordinary people to enter his eyes. This proud personality made him walk around the village after waking up in the morning. This behavior was naturally stopped by the patrolling Lung Feng. As a warrior, if there was a disagreement, a fight would break out. In a 1-against-2 battle, Xiao Lin bravely fought the 2 Lung brothers. In his opinion, it should be easy for him to defeat his opponents, but it took him half a cup of tea's time to defeat the 2. At this moment, the other Lung Feng had already surrounded the place, which attracted the attention of the tallest man beside Yang Chendong, Beta Persei, who also rushed over. In a 1-against-2 battle, Xiao Lin still won. This made the other Lung Feng feel a kind of shame. They all rubbed their hands, wanting to fight to regain their face. Beta Persei, who was better at fighting, saw that Xiao Lin won because of his strange and flexible movements. This might be the advantage of ninjas, that young master said. Chapter 242. His nimble movements often prevented the Lung Feng's close-range attacks from touching him. How were they going to fight this battle? Of course, this did not mean that the Lung Feng would not be Xiao Lin's opponent in a real fight. If they fought with their lives on the line, as long as one of them kept the opponent occupied, they could still create an opportunity for the other comrade to kill. Not to mention, when they fought with their lives on the line, would Xiao Lin be able to pass through the rain of bullets and reach Lung Feng? But no matter what, Xiao Lin had won. Beta Persei took a big step forward. "You're not bad, but I don't know if you dare to fight me. Of course, you've just fought and wasted some energy. To be fair, how about I let you use my left hand?" Beta Persei stood up and offered to use his left hand to fight Xiao Lin. This was an insult to a samurai. Xiao Lin would not back down. For the sake of a samurai's dignity, he readily agreed. The surrounding Lung Feng quickly moved aside, creating a large circle for the 2 of them to fight. When the 2 of them stood still, Xiao Lin made his move. He took a step forward and appeared behind Beta Persei. Then he threw a 1-inch punch at Beta Persei's waist. The speed of this attack was several times faster than when he was fighting against Cold Edge. This time, the other Cold Edge members who were watching the show sucked in a breath of cold air. At this moment, everyone realized that Xiao Lin had not used his full strength. Beta Persei stood there motionless, as if he did not notice Xiao Lin's attack. Only when the opponent's 1-inch punch was about to hit his waist and the distance was less than 15 centimeters, did he suddenly turn around and use his right elbow to block the 1-inch punch. Under Beta Persei's sudden counterattack, Xiao Lin only saw a blur in front of his eyes. Then he felt a sharp pain in his right fist. It felt as if he had hit a piece of iron. The strong rebound force forced him to take 3 steps back before he could regain his footing. Just as he regained his footing, a heart-piercing kick was aimed at his chest. Instinctively, Xiao Lin stretched out his fists to block, but his expression changed drastically upon contact. The power of this kick was so great that Xiao Lin couldn't block it even after using all of his strength. After being kicked, he flew backward until he flew for about 7 or 8 steps before landing on the ground with a loud crash. With just an elbow and a kick, Xiao Lin was sent sprawling on the ground. This scene naturally caused the other Lung Feng members to cheer loudly. Xiao Lin, who had been knocked to the ground, endured the pain from his arm and slowly stood up. "You're just relying on your tall stature and strength. If we're competing in patience, you're definitely no match for me. You want to compete in endurance? Then why don't we run? I think this is a way to show off our endurance, right? A voice that wasn't very loud, but just loud enough for everyone present to hear clearly rang out. Listening to the voice, everyone saw Yang Qindong, who was wearing a vest and shorts, walking over with Tiger's mane Yang Si, Yang Wu, Yang Lu, Chiu Vi and other members of the first guard team. Hello, young master. As soon as Yang Qindong appeared, all the Leng Feng members stepped forward to greet him, and they all stood up straight, looking very energetic. Good morning, everyone. Yang Qindong said to everyone with a smile, then walked to Shaolin's side. If you want to compete in endurance, this young master is going to run now. You can try to keep up with me. As long as you can surpass us, it proves that you are stronger. How about it? Hearing that there is going to be a running competition, and it was Loyal Gong who took the initiative to mention it, Shaolin was immediately overjoyed. In the past, when ninja training, the requirements for speed are very strict, and there are also extremely strict requirements for endurance, so running is also a common thing. Now that someone is competing with him in this direction, he won't be polite. He immediately agreed. Okay, I hope that Loyal Gong won't act shamelessly when you lose. Don't act shamelessly. Remember, if you really lose, you have to admit your shortcomings, haha. Yang Qindong, who looked up to the sky and laughed, said to Shaolin, then he took big strides and began his morning run. Except for Leng Feng, who needs to train assassination, the other brothers followed Yang Qindong and began to run all the way. It's not accurate to say that they are running. It's far less specific than running. Because there was no intention of slowing down from the beginning, Yang Qindong, who took the lead, took big strides and accelerated his speed. Shaolin is indeed a little uncomfortable with Yang Qindong's running method. But he is not afraid. In his view, this is just Loyal Gong trying to show off, trying to pull away from him and make him completely lose confidence. And as long as he can keep up with the other party's pace and rhythm, the other party will be powerless in the later stage, and at that time, it will be time for him to overtake. With this thought and confidence, Shaolin also shook off his arms and took big strides to keep up. And this time he ran a full 6 laps. Each lap is 400 meters and 6 laps is a distance of nearly 5 miles. His footsteps have been maintained at a constant speed, and Shaolin, who followed behind, did not notice that Loyal Gong is tired. This development is completely different from what he imagined. Shaolin used all his strength to keep up and began to take off his clothes. Originally, because of the weather, he was tightly wrapped, but now he began to take off his coat. After a while, only his underwear was left on his body. But even so, he still felt hot. The most important thing is that the distance between him and Yang Qindong is getting farther and farther. After another 6 laps, he has already run 5 kilometers. Shaolin felt that he has reached his limit, but when he looked at Yang Qindong, his expression still didn't change and his footsteps were still light. At this moment, if Shaolin doesn't know how powerful Yang Qindong is, then all his years of learning martial arts are in vain. At this moment, his heart gave birth to the idea of admitting defeat. And at this time, Junko appeared and saw this scene in front of her. The appearance of the goddess in Shaolin's heart seemed to have suddenly poured strength into him. His legs, which were originally as heavy as iron and lead, regained their strength. He began to exert his strength to chase, and he actually overtook the 2 guards. Yang Qindong, who was running in front, felt the change behind him. The corner of his mouth just smiled slightly, and then he also began to accelerate. The moment he exerted his strength, Shaolin, who saw a glimmer of hope, was left behind by 7 or 8 meters. The distance between the 2 sides continued to increase, and finally Shaolin couldn't see any hope. At this moment he knew that he was defeated, completely defeated. When a person's heart has no hope and fighting spirit, sleepiness and fatigue will all surge into the body. Shaolin, who felt that his feet were getting heavier and heavier, finally insisted on running half a lap, and finally fell to the ground with a plop, unable to stand up. After Shaolin fell, a guard quickly came forward and helped him up. Then a big bowl of steaming meat soup was sent to his mouth and he was poured into his mouth. After a while, Shaolin exhaled a mouthful of turbid air and opened his eyes again. He's fine. Send him to rest first and at the same time, give him a nutritious meal. After seeing Shaolin open his eyes again, the expression on an experienced guard's face relaxed, and then he gave his suggestion to the other guards. Shaolin was carried away, and on the other side, Yang Qindong also finished running 10 kilometers with his brothers. After stopping, they didn't immediately rest. Instead, they did all kinds of exercises such as kicking, bending, boxing, jumping. Junko didn't know whether it was because of an illusion or some other reason, but she kept feeling that Yang Qindong's body was as light as a swallow at this moment. After a stick of incense worth of exercise, Yang Qindong ordered, "Go take a bath first, then we'll have dinner." Immediately, everyone dispersed and went to the bathhouse in the outer courtyard of Xianxia village. When everyone passed by Junko, no one even looked at her as if she was nothing but air. If it was before, Junko, who was usually ignored by others, would definitely be annoyed and embarrassed. But now she couldn't get angry at all because at this time Yang Qindong came to her side. "I'm sorry, your guard is too competitive, so I taught him a little lesson. But don't worry, he will be fine. After this training he will only become stronger. By the way, I'm also sweaty, so I need to take a bath first. And do you want to join me?" When he said the last sentence, Yang Qindong's eyes had a trace of a naughty smile. Junko, who was teased by his words, immediately blushed and quickly lowered her head. After a long time she said, "Who wants to take a bath with you?" After saying this, when she looked up, she found that Yang Qindong had already disappeared, only leaving a heavy masculine scent in the air. But for some reason Junko didn't feel a trace of disgust, and the appearance of Yang Qindong's strong body when he was running just now flashed in her mind. In just one morning she had seen too many things that she had never seen before. Not to mention the countless strange things, even her guard captain Kobayashi was called a weakling by Yang Qindong's words. All of this subverted Junko's previous understanding, making her curious about the Xianxia village. "I'm going to stay here and see what secrets there are." It was as if he had made a big decision and found a reasonable excuse for himself to stay. After stomping her feet, Junko turned and walked into the courtyard. When Junko came here, all the people who had just been training had changed into new clothes and were eating meat and drinking soup. The fragrance was overflowing, making Junko, who had just eaten breakfast, unconsciously felt hungry again. But after all, she was a girl and she paid great attention to her figure, so this gluttonous person didn't do anything to her. And it was in this crowd that she saw Yang Qindong, who had changed into a green robe. She saw him eating meat and drinking soup with his subordinates. You're tuning in to the Zhou Xian's Legacy YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.